Coming up this week on the Markcast. Well, if you thought after the successful completion of Season 1 of XFL 2023, they were just going to rest on their laurels, think again. The XFL making league-wide cuts, doing a little downsizing. Matt Damon, should we be worried? What's happening here?
Do you understand that you will undergo the permanent and irreversible medical procedure commonly known as downsizing, and that your bodies will be approximately 0.0364% of their current mass and volume?
Nervous?
Little.
Well, I certainly did not foresee layoffs happening so soon in the executive branch at the XFL following the championship game. But here we are, Chief Marketing Officer gone, VP of Marketing and Branding gone. Should we worry? Is this cause for concern? I have smashed the emergency glass. The professor, Andrew Murray, we need to have a discussion.
I mean, it was essentially the Black Monday for the entire marketing staff of this entire league. And look, you and I have talked about it ad nauseum about the marketing strategies that have been implemented or not been implemented since this league came back out of the doldrums.
And then on your regularly scheduled program, we have Evan Willsmore coming on. We have created a watch list, XFL players that still deserve a shot in the NFL. Already have had players signed off of our list since we have recorded. We are bringing Evan on, deep dive. Who still deserves a shot in the NFL?
It's a numbers game, right? Someone has to get injured. Something has to happen for that spot to open up. And I do expect more to come for sure.
And then we are still talking USFL on the podcast. USFL Week 8. We have Furby of RunTheSims coming on. Full preview of the weekend's matchups.
I thought they might kind of spice it up a little bit. This year one, you kind of give them a free pass on some stuff. But then year two, you think you might make some changes, and so far it's kind of felt exactly the same.
And then we are 1 week away from the CFL kickoff. We have 3 CFL team previews today. JJ Adams over at Postmedia talking the BC Lions. Mike Hogan of the Toronto Argonauts previewing the Grey Cup champions return here. And then we have Steve Milton of the Hamilton Spectator. Full CFL team deep dives. We are getting ready for kickoff here soon. Probably going to be a long one. Hope you enjoy. Hey guys, welcome to the Markcast. Reed here. Was really just getting ready to preview, do the CFL previews here. We had a big segment planned with Evan. We're talking all the XFL to NFL, our watch list, our wish list, whatever you want to call it. And then we had big layoffs this week at the XFL. We did a shorts about it earlier this week. Janet Duke being let go, Anthony Zucconi, a lot of the sales members from a bunch of the teams across the league. League is kind of reformulating here. Redbird had a performance review following the season, kind of going in a new direction with some of this. Going to get all into that today with Andy. Really appreciate that. Andy and I already had a big segment coming next week. We had our whole episode planned, but we're bringing Andy in early as well. We need the professor here talking through all of that. Really appreciate Andy making the time. Like I said, Evan traveling, getting done with college. He has his watch list. All the players' backgrounds, everything that Evan knows, tremendous insights from Evan. Really appreciate Evan taking the time. And then Furby over at RunTheSims. We've had Justin Freeman on in the past, and certainly appreciate the guys over at RunTheSims doing the DFS and the stats, everything else, for XFL, USFL, and all of that. And then we are a week away from the CFL kickoff. Huskies Huddle and I are going to be doing a live CFL kickoff pregame show, a time TBD, but obviously before the game there, BC at Calgary next week. That game is going to be at 6 Pacific. So, probably 4:30 there. We'll be doing a CFL pregame show. I tried to get some more guests lined up for that. Should be a good one. And then, like I said, Andy and I are going to probably be having a special live episode next Friday, June 9th. So if you want the CFL stuff, come for the pregame show. We're going to be doing that on the 8th. And then our normal show will most likely be a live show with Andy if his busy schedule allows it on June 9th. And then keep in mind, we've had lots of info as well today about the rookie draft and all of that I'll be talking about with Andy. Russ Giglio and Doug Whaley were on the Inside the League call with Neil Stratton over there. We are going to be doing an XFL rookie draft live show, hopefully there on that June 16th. They've said it could be in the afternoon, could be the evening, waiting for them to pin down the time. But look for a cavalcade of guests there talking the XFL Rookie Draft, most likely for a kind of fun live show there on June 16th. Think that's it for me. We'll check back in at the end of the show. Thanks again. Well, Andy, we were all set up next week. We were going to do our big live episode off season. Like, what should the XFL be doing? Next thing you know, we're breaking glass. We bring the professor in. First and foremost, have you seen the Matt Damon movie Downsizing? Do you know the reference I'm making with this episode?
I actually have not. When you first posted that thumbnail, I was a little bit confused, and then I had to look it up. I've seen a lot of Matt Damon films. That has not been one on my list or even my bucket list. So you'd have to fill me in a little bit more on that one.
Well, yeah, there's no deep dive in that, but it is interesting downsizing because the premise of the movie is, people and consumerism has gotten so big. People are shrinking down. We're using less resources. We're more consolidated. A little bit how I feel about the XFL here with some of these layoffs. We'll talk through all of that. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I know you have thoughts and I have thoughts. Seen a lot of people north of the border having thoughts and everything else. But to set the stage here, this was Tuesday coming off Memorial Day. We just, we celebrate the championship game, all this. I really thought it'd be a couple quiet weeks. Evan's already on this episode. We're doing the XFL players to watch into the NFL. Next thing you know, I get sent a message from Fran, who is on the, the live show in wherever the heck we were, San Antonio. And he goes, hey, look at this. And it was one of the people that was working for the Vegas team. And they had posted on Facebook that they just got laid off from their sales job. He goes, hey, Reed, let's start doing some digging. I send it to the group. Mike goes, hey, I think changes are coming. Next thing we know, Mark has this article out. Huge sweeping cuts. Janet Duke, CMO of the league, gone. Anthony Zucconi, he was the VP of marketing and brand, gone. Many, we've heard upwards of 30 people kind of across the teams and everything else. What did you, because I know you're working and stuff, and I'm like, we got to talk about this. What did you think when you heard all these layoffs first and foremost?
I mean, it was essentially the Black Monday for the entire marketing staff of this entire league. And look, you and I have talked about it ad nauseum about the marketing strategies that have been implemented or not been implemented since this league came back out of the doldrums. And I mean, we can get into a lot more of those details as the show goes along, but I think the basic point that we came to, the conclusion that we came to multiple times, that quite frankly, enough was not being done to promote this league. Now, I have no doubt and in no way, shape, or form think that it has to do with the effort of the people who are behind the scenes. I think they put in as much effort as you could probably ask for. I do think one of the things I have to consider is that number that Mike Mitchell has reported a couple times about the budgeting of the marketing strategy. Like, it was somewhere around $120,000 or something in that neighborhood is what he has mentioned in his articles and has mentioned on air a couple of times. And so my initial thought when it came out was this because of the financial limitations, or was this because of the strategy not being implemented as Redford Capital and perhaps the league saw to what they envisioned? And maybe it's both. I think we've been learning more details since that's happened, but that was my initial reaction when I heard that news.
And it's hard, so of course I immediately, and I want to pull up Ben's article here. So Mark had the story, Ben Fisher, who's been on the show, and I felt we were more apt to talk about this now. I mean, Ben's just reporting the facts. I think, as much as I respect Ben, I think we can run through this a little bit better than he can, getting the statements out. The idea that I had people messaging me, that's where I was going. I had people messaging me like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I said, well, we have had criticisms all year about the marketing of this league. And I never want to see anybody lose a job. You never want to see anyone, Janet's been there forever, and Anthony was there. Janet was the team president of the Guardians back in the day for 2020. Like, I don't want to see that. But if it's something that you and I and many people have complained about all year, and they're immediately making changes to fix that. And, people had to lose their jobs. That to me is at least we're like recognizing this and we're adapting and not like, well, let's like roll it back again. Cause I think they went into this, they being Danny, Jerry, The Rock to whatever extent he's involved, having a certain perceived notion of like what this was going to look and feel like, who's going to talk about us, what kind of marketing do we actually need to do? And then now realizing after year one, I think our preconceived notions were very, very wrong. Do you agree, disagree with anything of that?
To some extent, I think what it tells me is that clearly that benchmark that we kept referring to of 2020 clearly was in the minds of the marketers and in terms of the league's operations this entire time. I know it's unfair to compare it to that point. I get it in some ways because it was a different time. It's a different ownership, different, just a different mantra that surrounded the league in a lot of ways. A lot of the rules and some of the players and obviously some of the legacy people stayed on board, especially in the marketing department. We talked about that, like you mentioned with Janet Douche. She's coming from the Guardians and then had a bigger role here. You had some other holdovers from that regime, but it clearly, look, even though we can make a lot about how, attendance figures for some of these teams increased as they went along, the point of the matter is a lot of them were down on average from their iterations of the teams that were here before, or in comparison to, say, another league, like I said, the AAF. We kept going on and on and on about San Antonio, how the Commanders were drawing, 25,000 plus people for that league in the short time that it was alive. And here you have the Brahmas, who are kind of a centerpiece. I know they're not the hub, but they're kind of another centerpiece in this operation. And the only time that they broke 20,000 the entire year was their first game in the regular season. The next time was the championship game. And even that didn't top that opener. So you have to wonder about figures like that and how they compared them or how they measured them. Clearly, whatever metrics they were using were not good enough. And this is why these changes were made. I think it's just, like you said, you never want to see someone lose their position over this. It's sad because a lot of people lose their jobs. And it's a league of opportunity, but it's opportunity to the point of what's going to be done for the league and what's going to be done for the brand.
And before Andy and I get too deep, I'll pull up the article here. We are going to talk the rookie. So that the Zoom came out, the Inside the League with Neil. Russ Julio was on that, Doug Whaley. We'll talk about that here at the end because kind of looking forward here to moving on. But obviously this is the pressing news, obviously leading the show with. And then we'll get to that because it looks and feels very similar to the USFL college draft. I don't think it's totally the same. Call me hypocrite or not. I've been talking with people about that today, in fact, directly, so we can kind of get into that. But to read through this Ben Fisher article, because I think there's some interesting notes here. So obviously, XFL dismissed CMO Janet Duke and Anthony Zucconi as part of a broader set of cuts generated by a strategic review of the league after one season. So Redbird apparently went in following the season, said we're going to kind of look through this, what didn't work. XFL officials declined to say precisely how many jobs were eliminated. They fit into two different buckets. One group are now deemed seasonal employees, and that could be a larger notion of a lot of like the outside of Jan and Anthony, some of these people contracts. Okay, we don't need you working like game day events at the Sea Dragons games. We don't need you there in August. We need you there February, March, April. But I don't want to get too seasonal to this. We'll talk about that. One is seasonal. They could potentially return to their jobs closer to the second season set to start in February. The other, including Janet and Anthony, were done after a review determined the league should shift from a brand marketing emphasis seen appropriate at launch to a more revenue-driven approach to maximize ticket and sponsorship sales heading into the critical second season. That to me is the more interesting part. What do you make of that? Because I do want to talk seasonality also.
It tells me that the bottom line was not being met, or it wasn't being met in the way that they expected. And again, yes, I think the brand itself in a lot of ways was pretty strong, all things considered, and from the holdover from the last league, from it being in the cultural zeitgeist really since it was created in 2001. It has a lot of currency. It really does. I think people still fail to understand how much currency this league's name has. And I think that's why ultimately the name was not changed. Like, I know you've talked a lot about that with some of your guests about like, what if Danny and The Rock came in and just made it their own league? and just rebranded it. Well, quite frankly, I think this is just a brand that was too strong for them to give up. That being said, clearly there seems to be too much emphasis put on that brand and expecting, oh, this is going to draw people back in and reel everybody back in from 2020. And resting on those laurels did not happen. It didn't happen to the extent that we saw back then. And because of that, while you were able to have traditionalists like the St. Louis fans and DC, the Beer Snake, and things of that nature, you had some other new traditions that were starting up with San Antonio and Orlando and Vegas. And obviously some of the other teams who had held over, even Seattle, but you've been on the ground floor with Seattle this entire year. You know, straight up, it has not been the same level of engagement, just in terms of the attendance and also in terms of maybe the advertising too, that happened 3 years ago. So obviously with those kinds of numbers across the board, obviously they are trying to drive up ticket sales. They're trying to drive up interest in their memberships. They're trying to drive up interest in merchandise sales and everything across the board. And their sponsorships, they clearly see this as the bottom line that they were not able to achieve. And there was too much emphasis on what had been achieved before and just kind of living off of the coattails of 2020.
Well, and that's, and to say it, I don't want to be too blunt about it because I've talked with Mike, the reviews episode that we did with Mike, and then it's come up a little bit. If you look at the major tentpole successes that you would say that they had city-wise this year, I would say St. Louis, DC. Seattle was not a success that it was in 2020. I don't know if you could name any others than those two that you would deem that was like a mitigated success. And if any of those that were success, any that were done by current regime, right? All of those were, St. Louis, DC carried over from 2020. I don't know if you could say of any other city or any newer city that was seeing the success this time.
Right. And even markets like Houston, Houston obviously was also successful as a team, but in terms, again, of the attendance numbers, not so much. You had a little bit lesser across the board there. Arlington, seemed about the same as it was before. I think that has more to do with the confines of the stadium and the structure of it. But, that was kind of a break-even situation. Orlando, I'll be honest, Orlando did not do as well as I thought it would. I really thought Orlando was going to be a better market. Now, again, that's based on my premonition of how the Orlando Apollos did in the AAF and who were doing very well as far as their attendance numbers. And yet they were not able to achieve that same level of success. And, look, who knows? Maybe the same thing would have happened if they were in another AAF market, Memphis or Utah or San Diego. Would they have been able to, like San Diego was the third highest AAF attendance. Would they have achieved those numbers? I don't know. Clearly, if they didn't put that enough emphasis in the marketing of that, that wasn't going to happen. And I have to tell you, Reed, again, one of the things that I can't help but remark at, again, is just how much local marketing was not being done at some of these levels that we've covered, we've talked about, and just doesn't seem to be as known or as prevalent this time around. It was there 3 years ago. It was there in some way, shape, or form. And this time around, it just was not there. And you can argue about, network television exposure. You can talk about it being only on ESPN and ABC and not Fox, and as it was, last time around. But the fact of the matter is, it just wasn't there this time around. And it's, splitting the difference with a different league now. It's a different set of circumstances, but based on their numbers, they did not achieve their goals.
And, and we'll talk through, and Max has all these notes. I ultimately think a lot of that will go into our conversation next week of what do we want the off season of the XFL to look like in terms of social media and kind of local events and all of that. But at least right now, when it comes to where they want to do some of these jobs that they want to get rid of, from focusing on the brand to more revenue driven, right? Maximize ticket and sponsorship sales. There has to be some sort of standardization across the board from these teams when it comes to ticket sales. Corey, the Guardians ticket guy. Corey posts every day on every Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and hey, I'm sitting at the 50-yard line. Come buy tickets. Corey is an example of doing tremendous work, on his own, I presume, grassroots, because there certainly doesn't seem to be standardization. I think the Seattle guy, and I don't know if he still has a job, I think the guy's name was David. I think I just know that because I kind of went to the Pick a Seat event and I, talked to I host whatever, we're here, but I don't know the Seattle guy. I don't know the, I don't know the Arlington guy. I don't know the girl, I don't know the San Antonio. Like the fact that you don't even just have standardization like that across the 8 teams of like, hey, these are going to be our team reps, call them, email them, get in touch. They're posting, they're, outside of, Haley or whoever with the Sea Dragons posting that content, trying to drive up ticket sales. No one, it was a far cry from Orlando and then it dropped to any of the other 7 teams. And I just don't think that that's fathomable. I just don't understand that.
And I think that's interesting you point out about the lack of standardization. I can't help but think about another league like the CFL, who kind of deals with that same issue in some ways. You have so much varying levels of promotion and engagement, whereas you have someone like BC's Amar Dolman really putting in the capital and trying to get people to go out to Vancouver, or Victor Cui trying to do everything he can, just trying to pull out all the stops to get people to go into Edmonton, versus your community-owned team, the Saskatchewan, and then you have Winnipeg, who kind of rests on their laurels and has their own success. And then there's Toronto, which everyone sort of, points at as the black sheep of the family in terms of being able to draw attendance. All of them having these kind of varying levels of success and engagement in their own way. And there's not really a lot of standardization there. Same thing's kind of happening here too, like you said.
But to interrupt that, I apologize. The CFL, at least that makes sense because you have 9 different heads of teams all coming together with Randy Ambrosie, kind of like that is Ambrosie's role as the commissioner. I got to wrangle these 9 governors of all these teams. The XFL, you're a single-owned entity team. Of anything, you should be able to standardize this across because you own everything. I mean, we're not even to the point of the USFL or the XFL. We're franchising these. I mean, of any time to have it all working together, it's this time right now.
Yeah, I mean, why is it? It almost like bleeds into like the social media aspect of it too. And I know it's not always related to like sales, ticket sales and all that, but like it even seems to bleed into like some of the mantras of the teams. Like, why is it, the Seattle account's always, on trolling people. Meanwhile, the Arlington Renegades account just seems to wage war against capitalization and does not, and continues to be the bane of Anthony Miller's existence. But I can't help but like feel you're right. Like there should be some sort of level of like flat base level standardization that is being done for all of these teams in that respect, especially when you have clear markers of who owns this thing. You have the figureheads who have ultimate control. There are no owners. Is no ownership group that you have to negotiate with or battle with. That doesn't, the revenue sharing, all that. It's like there's not something that is there in that terms of that level of parity. So I don't understand why that isn't being done on that level either. I have to agree with you on that.
Well, if you can't parent your kids under your own household, I don't think you're going to be able to parent them outside, when they're off into the world. Like if we can't get this right, owning all, it goes with the USFL as well. Like, if they think they're going to franchise this thing, which I believe is ultimately the goal, like, I mean, if you can't do it now with Fox and all the money and you got everything in the world here that we're going to, this is what we do. We make football. If you can't get it all right now, I don't know how these franchises are going to work because you can't, as we've seen, like we said in the CFL, I don't like seeing that level of disparity. I don't like seeing, where I've been told Saskatchewan, they don't do anything because they know people are going to come. Like I've emailed them to get people. I've done all that. Montreal, anything you want. Hey, you want the team owner? Here you go. Let's send him over. Like anything, because they understand that. But you should at least, we talk about parity in the USFL right now with teams going to the playoffs. You should have some parity here with these, teams in terms of marketing and sales and everything.
Yeah, I mean, the on-field product, I think, will continue to have parity, and there's definitely going to be that. At least you have that ability. But when you're not having people who see that in person, it's kind of hard to draw them into that. If you don't understand that, if you don't have people that understand the notion of, okay, well, this team wasn't very good this year, but they could be better next year, like Orlando, And again, this is year one, so we haven't seen this played out. I know this happens in the CFL all the time, which is kind of, honestly, is a blessing for teams like the Red Blacks, for example. Like, yes, you've been terrible the last few years, but you could dig yourself out of the hole and actually make a Grey Cup run if you really tried this year. And the same thing should be under the notion of this XFL league, which I think is very possible. But again, there's not enough people who understand that. And just overall, just the lack of, outside awareness of some of these brands. I mean, we've been reporting left and right about players getting signed, but I mean, you go into the threads of the teams in the NFL who signed these people, like people that just didn't watch these guys or haven't seen their highlight tapes. And that's something that the league has to get on. Now, I know, again, it's year one. So maybe if they actually start doing something at the next level, they'll actually start to look back and realize, oh, wow, this guy did this past season, but they don't have that level of exposure yet. So you need to get out in front of it and really push the envelope if you're going to get people to understand that exposure instead of just being word of mouth or via your player's success or coach's success.
I do feel a little less old man screaming at the clouds right now, just with it, where Redbird basically came in and kind of assessed the same thing that we've been doing here this whole time. Here, let's get there because I want to read this statement here that Mark got for New Sub and then Ben got. This is from the XFL spokesperson, Dan. Is this Gagnier? I don't know if I've ever spoken with this gentleman. As the XFL plans for 2024 and beyond, it has decided to transition to a dual full-time seasonal base, kind of going through all that. The XFL will continue to employ full-time business and football operations functions at both the team and league and team levels, and will scale up hiring each year for preseason and in-season roles. That's what scares me, is because we saw what the skeleton crew did this year, where we brought, and I understand we're not going to be hiring 800 people again in the, yes, Reed, I understand that. But, we saw what it felt like and looked like this year, onboarding seasonal employees at the same time that you have training camp starting, players are showing up, we're doing physicals, we're learning the playbook, we're doing media stuff, we're trying to get the social media stuff. Like, I don't like this scale up, scale down, and CFL does it. They go dead from basically December. They do their little team meetings, but they pop up in May when training camp starts. The day that a spring football league realizes that they're not a seasonal business will be a day that I'm very happy, because I don't think it works.
Well, I mean, I thought that they were already trying to do that with the draft next month, for example. They already announced the draft.
Okay.
That's good. Like that's something that they need to do now. They get to keep doing that as they go along. Now they have the showcases; those are good. Keep promoting the showcases. By all means necessary, promote the showcases as much as you can. Post about it, talk about it, write about it. Do whatever you can to post about it. But yeah. I mean, some of these people are seasonal employees, which to an extent I understand. When there's not game action going on, it's hard to get people involved. But you should see it more in the lines of, like stadium employees, for example, right? Like people don't work at the stadium because there's not an event. I get that. But in terms of promoting and in terms of, keeping it in the cultural conscience this entire time, you need to keep doing that. Like I know he's a very busy man, but I wonder about someone like Josh Lewin. Like, is the podcast just going to disappear for the next, 7 months? I mean, maybe you have an answer to that, but I wonder about stuff like that.
I was going to say, yeah, obviously we don't need, and like the lady that does the DC in-game announcing, they're kind of, it's like the Adam Goss of the, for the DC, where he's the Argos guy and he's screaming during the games. Like, you don't need to keep her employed all year. I understand that. Like, we bring in and we did that. But Josh did, and I understand Josh is busy, but Josh is paid by the league, and I'm sure the league would pay him if they felt necessary. Yeah, Josh did the post-championship episode, and they haven't posted, right? Why not interview some of these players that just got? Why don't we call up Darius Shepard right now and go, hey, man, you got to the Chargers. What? But it's like, we don't go away. Like I don't have an off season here. And I know that we cover the other leagues, but we've talked XFL every week, and we have plans to continue talking XFL here into the summer. You saw Maddie. I'm done. Like, season's over. I'm done. Mark hasn't posted. Mark did his obviously story this week, but Mark hasn't posted anything. Josh hasn't posted. Like, you can't just let this go away. That's what everybody complained about the USFL all last year. USFL goes away because you don't have anything going on to keep it in the news cycle at all. And it's just not sustainable. And it was really frustrating to me to see how many people were like, I'm all in this year, including the XFL. And then the second the season's done, it's like, hey, that's it. We're going off, and I understand people work hard, right? I understand that. But like, you don't get, there should not be an off season. There isn't an off season in the NFL. There shouldn't be an off season here.
I mean, well, this kind of information is coming out, but this is not the kind of information they want to have in the off season, right? One of the things that I want to see done in the fall season is I want to see more player profiles, but player profiles on people who have made it into the NFL who make the 53-man roster, or at least, are factoring in some way on this team that they're on, and be able to interview them and ask them, what's going on? How's it been? What do you take from your time in the league, and how has it helped you in your experience now in the NFL? I think that's something that the league should absolutely think about doing, because, we get player profiles all the time, but being able to see that like transition period too, I think would be fantastic for the league, especially if, possibly you could see someone like Darius Shepard having a big kick return for the Chargers, or, Hakeem Butler maybe catching a touchdown for the Steelers, like something of that nature that you can at least draw from and sort of see those parallels between what they learned in the XFL and then what they brought over into this league. Because, again, seeing commentary on like Shepard signing, by Charger fans who are like, oh, I don't know what this means. And it's like, this guy was the special teams player of the year in the XFL this year. He's a good kick returner. He's going to supply competition for a team that doesn't have a designated kick returner right now. Like that's fact of the matter. So I think that's something that I think that kind of content would be that's just one idea I have, but yeah, they need to stay on this. They can't just turn off the lights and disappear, and which they kind of did last year too, right? Like, I mean, yes, we got some announcements, but they were really putting us in the dark for a lot of the build up into the league. And that was just mystifying for a lot of us. And I don't think that's what you want to do, especially if you're trying to go from year 1 to year 2. You can't do it like the USFL does this year, because there's going to be numbers like you see on the USA Network or on FS1, like we've seen with some of the attendance figures, where it's like they're just not going up. They're stagnant. And there was just, because in my opinion, there just wasn't a lot done in the promotional material besides the Super Bowl ads for the USFL that were being done all the months beforehand going into the season.
This is we'll try. I don't want this to be just a complaint fest the whole time, but I do think this is valuable conversation. I don't, this is going to sound like Reed is angling to work for the XFL. I do. I own my own business. I'm very happy. I do. I spent all day today editing the wedding video. Very, very happy for that. I have weddings this weekend. The XFL kickoff for us was episode 132 of this podcast. Now, obviously, we have covered USFL and the Spring League and the CFL and all that stuff. XFL has always had a segment every single week on this show for 132 episodes without a single game of XFL content being played, and most of the time with very limited resources to the league. Now, obviously, they've been tremendously helpful once everyone got on board. The XFL has been great. I have no complaints. If we can figure out 132 weeks of off-season content talking about the XFL, like, I'll consult for free, guys. Like, it's not hard, but yeah, we're getting it. I would have Josh on the phone right now with Darius. Like, what is going on? Talk me through this. Like we said, what do you think about the new kick returns in the NFL? We've heard Kevontae Turpin talking about that, how he's going to run it back anyway. How do you think that, you spotlighting here, is that going to change how teams look to feature you now that that's all going to be different? Like, it doesn't have to be that difficult. And anyway, that's my point. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, I have to give credit, bouncing off that. I have to give credit to someone that you had on your show last week, John Hodge, and his employer, 3 Down Nation. Look, he said on this podcast this week, I was listening, he said that they did a uniform ranking, and that generated a lot of buzz. That's content, it's because there's some new uniform matchups for some of these teams. Obviously, the Cambridge Blues for the Argos, and some of the redesigns for the BC Lions, and a lot of other uniforms that are kind of getting rehashed and sort of reformed, and that created content. If they're doing that, I mean, why isn't the league doing that? What's going on with the aspect of just trying to create any sort of content whatsoever? I mean, one of the things the NFL does, for example, in the offseason, I mean, the YouTube channel is one of their best resources, at least for me it is. It's just posting highlight videos, videos of old games, legacy videos, things of that nature that really help them continue to stimulate content. I mean, right now is like the dead period for the NFL. I mean, there's really nothing going on, but yet there's still things that they're able to kind of create conversation for. And I mean, even something like, is Jimmy Garoppolo going to fail his physical with the Raiders? Like, that's something that just got everyone, kicking the tires and buzzing around and asking Tom Brady questions like, are you coming back this week? And him having to come out in the woodwork and saying, no, I'm not doing that. But like, that's the kind of thing, like, you have to somehow just like almost stirring the hornet's nest a little bit. Sometimes there's got to be a way for leagues to understand this, because like you said, you are someone that understands that and creates content on a regular basis and a weekly basis when there's nothing going on. And for many iterations of you doing the show, for the existence of the XFL, there really was nothing going on.
Did John Hodge bring up our podcast on their show or no? Did he just that doesn't?
I did not hear that. No,
Okay. I'm just curious. I gave John the follow. I gave Hodge the follow here. Let's see what happens. I want to talk through the rookie draft and kind of all that stuff. Anything else? Because I don't want this to, I feel like this is constructive. I just don't want this to be like verbal, especially just on my part, like verbal diarrhea here. So anything else you want to make sure we touch? We'll do the whole off-season talk next week. What do we want to see social media do and the Vegas deal and, local fan events and kind of all that stuff. Anything else like we fired Janet and everybody else?
I just don't think this is as alarmist as everyone wanted to make it out to be at the beginning of the announcement. I get it. When you hear layoffs, your first reaction is, oh my God, the company's going underwater. What's going to happen? That happens. This is the kind of story that comes out for many kinds of different entities. Now, in this case, is an entity that has not been around that long. So of course, your level of skepticism is maybe a little bit higher than it is with someone like, say, Google or Amazon or Twitter or something of that nature, where something all of a sudden mass layoffs are happening and you're starting to, set the house on fire. But I just hope that the league is able to understand where it's going. I think they have a clear vision, but they need to understand what resources they have on hand. And if they're going to be more revenue driven, if they're going to be able to keep the interest going, they need to understand how they have to go about it. If it's going to be the same offseason as it was last year, I don't see many results changing, quite frankly. But if they are going to actually promote themselves a little bit better and shift gears, and if whatever strategy they implement this time around with the new employees or people who get into consolidated roles, all right, then let's see if that works. But this is something I think you and I both agree that things need to change. And I think Mike Mitchell and perhaps others would agree with you that there needs to be at least a shifting of the gears here. Last point I'll make too. If we're going to do this, try to pitch to people a little bit better about your Vegas team playing on the equivalent of a pasture field, because getting people out to Cashman was really a chore this year, and you need to be able to get people involved in that market. The Vegas market is something that they really have to push for, and obviously the sales team unfortunately fell on the sword for that one. And look, Redbird Capital, Jerry Cardinell maybe had more play in that as far as getting that out there and involved in having that market out there, but they've really got to be able to push that, because if you wanted to make it work, you're going to need to push, for lack of a better term, push more of your chips in the middle of the table.
The last thing, and then I do have one concern here I wanted to forget to bring up. Yeah, when I heard that the Vegas, it was the Vegas individual that had posted that they were let go, I immediately thought, oh, they're relocating Vegas. And then all this other stuff came out and you're like, okay, it's much bigger than that. I did see CFL people like, oh my God, like they laid off the whole marketing staff. Like, that's crazy. I bet you a lot of CFL fans would be very happy if the CFL laid off part of their market. It doesn't necessarily mean budgetary, but here is my fear. If we're trying to if we're downsizing, if we're trying to consolidate, if they get rid of Janet, who, for what they were given, I think was doing their best. Do we just have someone at Redbird also do this kind of thing, which to me is worse, because then you're getting someone even further away. Like, at least Janet knew, okay, this is what was going on in 2020. This is what worked in New York. That's my fears. Okay, now we want to save costs. We're just going to have other Redbird people do part of this stuff for the XFL.
Yeah, I mean, that plays more into the hub strategy in a way, but it does sort of question as to whether that's going to change the wins at all, or if it's just going to make things just more consolidated, more conservative in terms of how they operate. And that's something that are they going to be able to get away with that? It seems more in line with what they're going with for the USFL, for example. That's more of in line with their strategy. And I have my thoughts on that. And I don't know if there's any way that the XFL is going to be able to implement that same strategy. Look, people invest their time and money into this league. There are people who really put themselves forward and invest their time and money. And we need to see the league do that too. You can downsize all you want, but you better, whatever strategy you implement, if you're going to be outsourcing, you better outsource correctly.
Well, but I mean, that's my thing is, I think we were talking about it, and I think Mike was the one that kind of originally brought it up in the group chat. And I said, that's the Fox Sports special. Hey, we got so-and-so's doing NFL on Fox, social media. Like, let's log you into the USFL account for a couple hours. That's my fear, because at least Janet knew what was happening, like what worked, and was like, she was on the ground floor from the beginning, right? That was my fear when they got rid of Oliver Luck and Jeffrey Pollock, was like, okay, we're losing some of this identity that was here, right? We're losing, same with Sam Schwartzy and all that. You start kind of shedding the past. If you do it too much, I'm a little concerned that they have someone kind of freelance this alongside other things at Redbird.
Yeah, like just giving too many responsibilities to one person and somebody who's not really has their finger on the pulse of what's actually going on. And, we've talked a little bit about that with USFL. There's sometimes some consolidation or some people that may be involved who are sort of have their hands in too many baskets and aren't really all in on the operation. So that's something that I don't want to see from the XFL either. I would really not prefer that's the route they go, unless somebody is really be committed to this league, like be committed to what's going on, be committed to the product, the brand, and everything that goes into it. Because let me tell you, the coaches, the players, personnel, the fans, they're all invested. Then everybody who's working in this league needs to be invested as well.
My last point, we've seen now there was concerns. We have Redbird. They want to make money. They're a capital investment firm. The second the season was done, they came in and said, these are things that we're not like, we need to get rid of these immediately. And I think Vince, we talked, and Vince was burning a lot of money and doing a lot of things. Who knows if that would have, XFL would have lasted into season 2 or 3. With the churn rate they had. I just, and this is what happens when you have an investment firm and all of that. All right, so we are going to pull up, I want to get through this. I'll time code this too, so you can just, if we want to talk through this, I'll pull up Mark's article. I watched the Zoom today as well. If you guys, I would recommend, if you are a player, and I tweeted this, if you're a player, as opposed to DMing me or Evan or Pat or Ed, like, how do I get into all this? The Inside the League on YouTube, it's about 46 minutes, has everything you would ever want to know about the XFL offseason here, what they're looking to do with the showcases, with the drafts, multiple drafts, all of this stuff. Russ was on there with Doug. The big things were obviously the rookie draft coming up. I think it's going to be 10 rounds and 8 picks. They're going to have a secondary draft in the fall and then a supplemental draft in November. What do you make of this rookie draft? Because it feels very USFL college drafty, but I'll explain why maybe it isn't. But what do you think?
I think it's a little bit different. It's not just drafting someone's name out of thin air. And from what I've collected, that they weren't players that were known that were privy to knowing that they were actually being drafted by this league, or that they were even eligible for the draft. So for the XFL, it sounds like it's a little bit different in terms of them actually drafting people who are undrafted free agents and may not be making the rosters in the NFL, which, I mean, those are the kind of people they should be targeting, right? That's the kind of players you want to look for. They have a multitude of players that they're looking after, but that's one of the pools that they're looking at. They have multiple avenues to go about this, and I think that's something that if there's a player that doesn't make the practice squad and the 53-man roster, that they have a way to at least have some sort of kind of, I guess, hammock or like net to be able to fall into in case they are not able to make it past that point.
I was corresponding today with someone that's pretty closely involved with a lot of this stuff, and just saying like, hey, I really appreciate that this was done so that we could kind of see what was going on, because there were so many concerns when it came to the USFL. Oh, not concerns, like the USFL's college trial. Like, okay, what is this? Like, are you guys? I appreciate the transparency that Russ and Doug had on the call, and like, we're still working through some of the stuff, and this is why like we're not sending out contracts, because we're still trying to figure out if we're going to get unionized, and so we don't want to have the contracts be sent out if we're going to unionize. Even the reason why they had players sign for 1 year with a second year extension versus signing people for 2 years. I think the timing of this is good, and Russ was the one that said it. Russ is one of the guys with Doug. They're running all the showcases and doing all this stuff. If you're an NFL player now wanting to be, and it's the middle of June, You know you're not getting into a camp, most likely. You're not getting onto a squad. As opposed to sitting around and saying, what the F am I going to do with my life now for the next 6 months? Getting drafted into this, having your rights retained by one of the teams, it gives you more of a sense of purpose for that, where the timing wise, where the USFL draft did it, immediately following, I think it was even before the actual like draft. All of those players in their heads still think, I'm making it to an NFL roster. Why would I want to be this? Where now, like, you kind of know your lot in life, at least for this kind of calendar cycle. So I think timing wise, even if they're both fundamentally the same in terms of you'd never have to step a foot in the XFL. We just have your rights. I think timing wise, this makes a lot more sense mid-June than it does mid-February.
I think so too. I mean, the draft is a dream for everybody, and it's a dream that you want to buy into. And that goes for all the people who are drafted or undrafted free agents and are signed on to a team. I mean, there's a litany of players in the NFL who were undrafted free agents that ended up being great players. And I think they still had belief in themselves, even when they weren't picked on those days, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, or back in the old days when it was just 2 days. They don't really feel like they are out of it until they're truly told that they're out of it, And in this case, I think they at least have more of a reality check of the situation, and they kind of start to see, all right, when are these cut downs going to start coming, or where am I in the queue or the list of prioritization with some of these with the coaches in terms of the opportunity that I truly have. I mean, again, it's a nice other option, and it's going to be interesting to see where the XFL goes as far as keeping some of these players, retaining some of these players too, going forward, and people who know or want to just be XFL lifers. I mean, this year you had more examples of players who came in for 1 year and were like, hey, this is my 1 year, one shot, and then I'm out. TJ Barnes, great example. He went up one more year. He had a great year with the Renegades, got his ring and peaced out, and now he's on to his next stage in life. Great, awesome, fantastic. I think there's going to be more players like that going forward, and maybe some that are more realistic, and maybe some that just have more fun and just say, hey, I want to be guaranteed playing time. Like, playing is a big deal. It really is. Some of these players just want to get on the field, and the NFL's cutthroat. You're not going to get that all the time unless you have the absolute right situation. And I think some players are going to be in that realm of just wanting to get out there and just play and develop too. Development is such a big thing. NFL, the NFL is so, it can be so brutal and also just so impatient with players sometimes, saying, I don't know what this guy's doing. I don't know where he is. He hasn't gotten anywhere. And it could be their first 2 years or 3 years of development. And some of these guys just don't come on that early. You really want to wait until someone like Jordan Ta'amu being in the NFL, being on a practice squad at 22. I mean, quite frankly, his skill set just wasn't there. This past season, I think he has a much better shot. I mean, he has jumped leaps and bounds as a quarterback, and that took years for him to get to that point, and mid-season even in this year. So I just think there needs to be more realistic stock of where players are as far as where they are and being developed, and especially like you said in the June timeline, it just makes a lot more sense in terms of recruiting and getting people into the system.
Yeah, so it seems like, and I think it was Russ said, any XFL draft now is basically going to be open position, right? We've done our initial one. We're not rebuilding every team from scratch. There's going to be this rookie draft here on the 16th. They're ballooning up the offseason rosters up to 90. There's going to be, obviously, they're doing the showcases all year. During the summer here, there's going to be the 6. Nick Novak's going to do one. They obviously could add more. That's going to go. They're going to funnel those best players into the combine. All of that is going to kind of be included. And it sounds like a September draft that's going to be going on. And then they're going to be having maybe a November draft where we kind of get final NFL cuts. So I don't think any of them are going to ever be as big again as like the initial, but kind of different stopping points so we can stock up players, because it basically it's hitting 3 unique subsets, right? These are players that kind of don't maybe have anything going on right now. You get the guys that are kind of trying to find their way in the showcase and do that. If you're not, because the rookie draft, it has to be this year, you were eligible and not drafted. If you're an older player, you can do the showcases and all of that. And then obviously the NFL cut. So it seems like they don't want to let anyone fall through the cracks. Am I kind of understanding that?
Absolutely. I think so. Just keeping all their options open and having as much pool assessment as they can, and also just signing players mid-season. I think that's something that's a bigger deal in these leagues too, is mid-season acquisitions or trades. As far as some of these players moving around, I thought about this morning. If I'm looking at it, the two teams that won in the past 2 years in the USFL and XFL, I think about like the USFL added Bo Scarborough, right? He wasn't drafted initially. He was just kind of floating out there. He's from the Detroit Lions. They added him. He gives them another element on their run attack, and he helps them win a championship. Renegades this past year, they didn't have Luis Perez. They traded for Luis Perez. The entire season changes. Some of these midseason ads are a really big deal for some of these teams, that players that aren't even in the draft pool initially are not available at that time, but then later on they are. So even just the midseason acquisitions too, in addition to these drafts, this is a multi-month process. It really is. And I think that because of the fact that you don't have these players who stay for long term, and if they play so well, they're just going to move on. You're not going to have sort of like this same mentality as far as talent acquisition in all one space like you do with the NFL. The NFL is just, it's the draft, it's free agency, boom, that's it. As opposed to in the XFL, the USFL, and the CFL, where it's all year round. It's just whoever's available at whatever time, at any reason, at any point. So that's also part of why the news cycles, I think, can also bear to be a little bit more year round, because the players are moving year round. This is a constant cycle for them too.
I like how they were saying, I think it was Doug said this first batch is obviously off of guys that maybe were invited to NFL camps that didn't make it. Kind of, they're sitting here in the summer because hey, they were good enough to be brought into an NFL camp. Let's kind of streamline some of our resources here, where maybe we don't have 10,000 hours to spotlight every. Hey, they've already done enough work to kind of deem them worthy to be in this. It was funny here. I was going down and I saw, I'm like, oh no, they made the video private. I think Mark must have embedded, they posted the wrong Zoom last night. So that must be this one. Because I thought, oh my God, no, because this has such good information in it. If you go on the Inside the League, it's still, the correct one is still there. It has 165 views. Think of all the players that DM Mike, I said Evan, Sam, everyone, 165 views. It tells you everything you need to know. So anyway, I'm not trying to sell that. The last note, and then we can probably get out of here soon. They asked about the NFL Alumni Academy. Doug said they have not heard from them. Feels weird. What do you make of that? They're kind of moving forward like that's not a thing.
Yeah, I have a theory that the relationship with the NFL Alumni Academy might be terminated as far as this season goes. Look, it was I'm not going to call it a mess, but there did seem to be some miscommunication as far as what was going on earlier last year, as far as what number of players need to be allocated, who was guaranteed a contract, who was going to get on some of these rosters. There seemed to be a bit of a snafu with that as far as what the league promised and maybe what the NFL Alumni Academy expected. And they kind of rectified it a little bit before the season started as far as expanding rosters and allowing more players to get on. But the fact of the matter is, I think the NFL Alumni Academy expected more. And I think what the XFL realized is that, actually, maybe there's more resources than we realized initially. There's a lot more players out there in different ways that we can collect this talent, and we don't necessarily have to rely on the NFL Alumni Academy. And that's not so much the fault of the NFL Alumni Academy. It's just what the XFL found out worked for them. So, yeah, I have a feeling that relationship may not be around much longer, and to no fault of either side, I think it's just not a relationship that was going to be amicable. Look, this IFL thing, right? Like this IFL partnership, for example, the XFL. I don't know how much that's really going to factor in the next year. Are those guys going to move up from the IFL into the XFL? I don't know. That what kind of partnership that is. It's good, more clout for the IFL than anything. So I'm not really. I think the XFL is kind of piecing this all together, right? They're all saying like, all right, well, this works, this draft works, this scouting profile worked, this showcase worked. Maybe this is more where we need to go. Like they're clearly, the number of boosts in showcases clearly tells them, okay, let's put more of our capital and resources in this than opposed to in the NFL Alumni Academy. So they are piecing that together themselves. It's the same thing like with the CFL trying to global draft. And people have their opinions on that, whether that works or not. I think all these leagues are figuring out whether or not where their talent acquisitions work and where they don't. So yeah, I don't think that relationship between the Alumni Academy and the XFL is going to be around much longer.
There was surprisingly a lot of questions on the Zoom about the IFL with agents, because it must have been like, right, many of the agents on the call were, representing guys in that. They said we want them to focus on playing, like if they're in the playoffs or whatever, knowing that we will see them and know that we can get a spot. I think Doug said we would much rather see them playing football than running around in their underwear at the combine. Like, so we're going to see the football and all of that. But no, I think with the alumni thing, it's kind of like, how like some weeks on the podcast I have like 7 guests, and it's like, why does read us? It's like, because I ask a lot of people and I don't know if everyone's going to say yes. And I think that was kind of like the XFL, like, let's kind of get all these things going. Because, like, what if we don't have anyone that wants to play in our league? And the next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, like we have so many players. Like we're flush with cash here. It's like having 2 dates to homecoming or something.
Well, I mean, they spent months talking to the CFL and talking about a partnership. I mean, they turned no stone unturned for this league. Really, they looked through every option possible. Whether you debate whether they should have been involved in those options, that's up to you. But like they were committed to doing their homework. I will give them that credit. Like I think that's something that, honestly, I think something like the CFL could learn more from, as far as like just explore your options, see what you got out there, see who wants to partner with you, who wants to do this, who wants to work here. The XFL, whether it works or not, I mean, they're kind of just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it sticks in some ways. And do they want to be more consistent and more standardized and being more of a league? Sure. But they clearly were trying to do as much homework as possible the first 2 years before they started up again to see what was going to work for them. And I think they're learning now, which, we to go back to the top of the episode, the marketing wasn't up to par. Okay. Maybe the Alumni Academy relationship wasn't good enough. Okay. We'll see about the relationship with the IFL moving forward, their partnership. They're like all these different levels of things that they tried at the beginning and in the middle of their process. If they're going to continue with that, they clearly don't seem to be afraid of switching gears and going another direction, because they believe in their product and they want to be successful, and they're taking risks. Not all of them are going to work out, and they're right to be criticized for things that they didn't do well, or they could have gone about a different process, but at least they're trying.
Yeah, it's a weird, I guess my life, we could go on, I mean, clearly forever talking about all this stuff, which is good. If you enjoy this conversation, Andy and I next week will plot out the entire XFL offseason. But it's one of these things, like, even nowadays, like, I've just noticed, and I don't know if it's a thing nowadays, like, you're not able to, like, people aren't able to change their mind. Or like, if you change your mind, like, you're a hypocrite, or like, oh, you deleted the tweet, like, oh, like, what? It's like, maybe you thought a thing and you were wrong. Or like, I talk a lot with the CFL people now, and I was like, yeah, I probably didn't know a lot back when I was, when Paul and I were fighting the Rosh on here. Like, it doesn't mean that you're a hypocrite, or, it means you educated yourself or you move forward. It's the same with the XFL here. Like, it wasn't like they went into it like, we're going to con the Alumni Academy out of, like, they thought it was a good idea. They tried to do it. I could have told them it was too many players, and they like, I could have told them Cashman Field wasn't going to work. I could have told them a lot of things, but, I don't know. Andy, I feel like we could tell a lot of people a lot of things, but anything else from you? I appreciate this. We're almost at 55 minutes here. Anything else from you before we get out?
I mean, just let me know when the next alarm bell is rung, and I'll be there ready to go whenever you need it, Reed. Andy,
yeah, put up the bat signal.
That really is.
What is it? Batman, like, he's got it was one of the new, like, Ben Affleck ones, or Christian Bale, where he just screams like, "Punish me," or "Call me," or it's one of his screaming ones.
Did you say "swear to me"? Is that what you're
saying?
Swear to me. Swear to me. Yeah. That's it. Amongst his many lines. Hey, listen, if anything else, if I can't be your Robin, your Batman, I'll at least try to be your Skip to your Shannon, because we got shoes to fill now, buddy. We got big shoes to fill.
How did I forget? That's how late in the day we're recording. How did I forget not to start the episode off with we haven't outlasted, but we've outlived now Skip and Shannon, which they didn't talk about it today on the show. So I think they're just trying to kind of play coy until the end. We're talking like Miami Heat here at Celtics or whatever.
Yeah, just Heat and Nuggets, the matchup.
That's it. Sorry. I'm living in the
don't make Sam come after you. You know, our resident Denver Sam Sham Shady.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Thanks, you guys. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Hey guys, Future Reed here, editing the episode, and we already have 2 additional players from the XFL signed to NFL contracts via the Battlehawks today, announcing we have Marcel Aitman signed to the Buffalo Bills, and we have friend of the show, Darius Shepard, signed to the Los Angeles Chargers. I know Eddie Murray is especially excited about that one. I know Evan and I talked about Darius in our interview, and I just wanted to keep you guys up to date, but Darius and Marcel getting signed here contracts, could have more. I hope you guys enjoy Evan and I's chat, but always good to see. I think we are 25 and 26 players now signed to the NFL via the XFL, so good for them. Well, here we are, Evan, back from LSU, still on the grind here, Evan. We talk a lot about how impressed everyone is with all the work you do, and this will be no different today. We have Evan Willsmore here. We are talking the XFL to NFL. We were tracking who's got signed. We have 24 now who we're still keeping our eyes on and everything else today. Evan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, I appreciate all the kind words. It's good to be back from college, over the summer, but I'm still working. You're definitely right about that. It seems like life just gets faster and gets busier as you get older. So it's one of those things you have to realize. But I'm excited to be on here today and excited to talk about some players who, we think should maybe go to the NFL or at least get a chance. Some of them have already been to mini camps, and we'll make note of that, I think, as we go. But yeah, there's a lot of good players, in this league that played in 2023, and excited to talk about some of them.
Yeah, so we have here, and Max has put together work. Evan's got a list as well. We're kind of balancing this. This is the list we have thus far, the 24 players signed. We just had Brandon Dillon here with the Washington Commanders, Vegas Vipers this week as of recording. Obviously, things could change here through the end of the week before this goes on. But 24 players. Evan, are you surprised with any of the players you've seen that have gotten signed thus far to the NFL contracts, as I tried to adjust my microphone?
Yeah, there's definitely been some surprises, I think, from my perspective, but it seems like that happens in every spring league. There were guys going back that I was surprised about in 2020 and, the AAF in 2019 and, even some guys maybe in the CFL. But yeah, for the most part, it's a pretty solid list. Again, I'm glad that guys like, some of the real standouts like Lucky Jackson, maybe, Jacquez Patrick, Luke Barku obviously was a really good one. Couple guys on the Battlehawks that I really enjoy. And then the Sea Dragons have had a lot of players signed. I was definitely going to bring that up. You just look at that sheet there. I think that's 6 players so far, and it definitely felt like that. But yeah, overall, not a bad list. Definitely hope it continues to grow. I will say maybe I expected a couple more by now. Maybe I thought we'd be pushing 30 or a little over. But, the thing is that these NFL camps, are starting to get so full up, right? And a guy like who we'll talk about later, Ja'Cour Pearson, I think should be signed already. And I know the 49ers were really interested in him, but, their roster was at 90. And I think Mike Mitchell was the one who mentioned that. So again, it's kind of just, it's a numbers game, right? Someone has to get injured. Something has to happen for that spot to open up. And I do expect more to come for sure, but it might be a bit more of a slow process. I know Brandon Dillon from Vegas signed with the Commanders yesterday, and that seemed to be the first signing in a couple days. I think the last one before that was Lucky Jackson to the Vikings, if I'm not mistaken. So,
well, it's interesting, and we've talked about this before on here, and obviously, XFL 2020 and the way that season ended, and we got a lot of players that went over to the NFL. A lot of them that are still there to this day. USFL filling the gap last year, and then now obviously with the XFL and the USFL, you're really getting kind of this backlog now of talented players trying to get spots. Not saying that it's not going to happen, but like you said, injuries, we don't want to see that, but that does open up this gambling probe that's going on in the NFL, other things like that. So it might kind of curtail into the summer, but it's definitely a different scenario than it was even 3 years ago with the XFL 2020.
Oh, absolutely. The XFL, when they finished that, I guess, first or second season, however you want to put it, in 2020, that was right when COVID started, in the NFL, there seemed to be more spots open. That was the time where they were expanding practice squads, things like that. So it definitely was a different time. And, I'm not going to turn this into a debate about which version of the league was more talented, whether it was 2020 or 2023. I'm sure I know people that are on both ends of that spectrum. But yeah, you're definitely right. It's a different world now, even just 3 years later. The politics are different, and there's a lot more that goes into these things than there was before.
So we'll get here. We'll pull up. Evan's got his list. Like I said, I know Max was putting together work as well on this. Evan, we kind of consolidated this down a little bit here. We can go team by team, touch on this a little bit. Obviously, Renegades, champions here, XFL champions, coming in late. There was a lot of debate even a couple weeks ago. Like, how come the Defenders guys haven't got tryouts yet? How come the Renegades, we're moving to that? They're through the championship game. I don't know if that will delay signings or not. It is kind of something to track here. Like, do you want to make the XFL playoffs in the future, or do you want to kind of get out to be able to get in that first wave? But who do you have for your highlighted from the Renegades?
Yeah, right. So I've got 3 players here for the Renegades. Tyler Vaughn's, the wide receiver from USC, definitely impressed me later on in the season once the offense kind of got going with Luis Perez. Again, there wasn't a lot there to write home about early on between Kyle Sloter and Drew Plitt. And that's nothing against them, right? But you definitely, we always talk about this sort of transition in the Renegades second half of the season, or maybe not even second half. I think it was around week 7 when they got Perez and started, turning upward and eventually winning the championship. But Tyler Vaughn's was a guy who really impressed me. And then the one that really stands out here the most that I'm going to kind of elaborate on is Donald Payne, the linebacker from Stetson. He's a bit older now. I want to say he's maybe 29, but he really shined last year with the Gamblers, and I was surprised that he wasn't picked up by the NFL again. And if he doesn't get picked up, at least for a camp for a bit or something this time around, I'm going to be equally surprised as well, because even if this guy's a bit older, and maybe in the NFL nowadays they favor more younger players that are coming in to compete with the undrafted free agents that a team has signed on to the 90-man roster. Donald Payne is someone who I think even at that age still deserves a shot. And I don't know, I want to say the last time he played in the NFL was maybe 2019. I can look that up. I know he was with the Jaguars for a bit there very early on. But again, Donald Payne, again, extremely impressive. And it really showed, too, the difference he made compared to when he was on the field for the Renegades and when he was not. And then the last guy for the Renegades that I have is Marquette King, punter from Fort Valley State. A lot of people obviously know who Marquette King is. Spent many years with the Raiders, was a second-team All-Pro punter in the NFL, then went to the Broncos for a bit, and then was with the Battlehawks in XFL 2020. And then this year he was with the Renegades. Obviously a fan favorite, someone I got to meet during the XFL season. And, for him, again, he's an older guy as well. I believe he went undrafted and signed with the Raiders in 2012. So, he's getting up there in age. But, he was really impressive this season, too. Clearly he's still got the leg and still got the swagger, too, a bit of an ego. And he's just all around a good guy. And I think it would be nice to see him, at least get into an NFL camp. Again, punter is one of those positions where a team is only going to carry one of those. So, maybe he's one of these guys that kind of sneaks in at the end of December or something, if an injury happens. But, Marquette King is kind of one that I wanted to throw in there as well.
No, I agree with Marquette. Obviously, I posted a couple weeks ago, Kyle Brand over on Good Morning Football did a segment about that, talking, obviously Marquette with his big single he has released and coming off of the championship game. Yeah, Donald Payne, a friend of the show from this season, I think it's an age thing there. Like you said, you're surprised, obviously, even last year with the Gamblers. Just a couple others, just so I don't get yelled at here. We had TJ Barnes. We talked about Tomzai Lalili. Devontae Busby, Josh Hawkins, Joe Powell, Taylor Russolino here coming off of Renegades. Any other notes or comments on any of those players?
Again, Russolino is a specialist. He impressed me a lot this year. Thought he was one of the better kickers in the league behind John Parker Romo, who obviously is now signed with the Lions from the Brahmas. But, again, kicker's another specialist position where they're only going to carry one of those guys, right? So Russolino, I remember at the end of 2020, played in a game for the Broncos, and that was one game. He got signed. And that was just kind of what it was. So, a guy like Taylor Russolino, you might see him come in like at the end of a season or something like that, or middle of the season as an injury replacement. But, obviously, yes, he was impressive. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, Russolino, he had that was that tough game at the Broncos. I remember that. It was like the win game, and he missed on that. We were so excited for him. I remember because even obviously podcasting at that time, like it was great stories to have on. Luis Perez, I don't know I don't know if I see him making a spot here at this point, even having won the championship game. I think Teamu, we can get on that. Any brief thoughts on Luis Perez here? What's next for him?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up Perez. Again, this was not a guy that was on my list. And I feel like, again, he's sort of one of these guys where he's definitely not in the twilight of his career, because we saw what he could do with the Renegades. He definitely had an uptick in performance at the end of this 2023 season. And he was very good with the Generals last year in the USFL in 2022. But, even after that, he had a season with the Generals last year. They lost, before they got to the championship. He was brought back to Rams camp. Obviously he's kind of won over, I think, Sean McVay and those offensive guys, even though it's been a couple years since he was last there. But with that being said, I feel like he's at a point in his career where he might be one of these guys where, he just kind of sticks it out in these spring leagues. Maybe he just hangs around with the Renegades, tries to, build things, recruit in the offseason with Bob Stoops and the rest of the coaching staff. And of course, the DPP as well. So I think personally for me, he's a guy I would like to see just kind of stay in the spring football realm. I don't know. I just don't really see a benefit to him going back to the NFL at this point. And that was something that he mentioned in one of the press conferences. He said, me being able to do this, whether it's the XFL or the USFL or the AAF or the Spring League or all these different places that he's been, the one benefit is that you actually get tape and you get to play as opposed to sitting on a practice squad or just getting a couple preseason reps. And I think that's kind of his ceiling in the NFL at this point, is just those preseason reps, kind of practice squad guy, maybe I don't know. Yeah, just it's someone who would not really be active on game days is the idea.
Yeah, you get into that. I think this is the same with Sal Cannella here, where you pop in and out a couple times. Maybe you feel a little bit more expendable, even if obviously you've had, still able to play and all of that. The thing with Luis Perez, and we've said this kind of like, how does the XFL maintain here coming forward? You have to have some of these guys that are just going to be XFL or USFL, either one. You got to have these guys that are bodies moving forward that are going to be their kind of mainstays. Moving on to the Roughnecks here, obviously a team that you covered thoroughly here for New Sub. You got, was it 6 year? My eyes are hurting me. What do you make of this, and who are you looking for from the Roughnecks?
Yeah, I believe I have 5 on that list, but I will say, because I was there at all the home games this season, I would have probably put 10 or 15 because I love all those guys. And again, this is where maybe a bit of my bias comes in. But regardless, this team still did have talent one way or another, whether I'm biased or not. The guy really I wanted to point out here out of these 5 is the first name, Max Borghi, running back from Washington State. Of course, he was playing in a pass-first offense with AJ Smith, so didn't have a ton of yards, and I think he only averaged 3.9 yards per carry over the course of the season, which isn't exactly elite. But if you watched him during the season, I like to say numbers don't lie, but they also don't tell the full story. And he's one of these players that I think falls into this category because, he might have not had all the yards or all the, high averages or whatever, but he was – his runs were just so shifty, and especially his ability to run after the catch, coming out of the backfield. He was a great fit for that offense. And I really hope, he was with 3 NFL teams last year in 2022 after going undrafted. So he definitely didn't have time to really sit down and learn a playbook. He was bouncing around so much. So I really hope that he can at least get into a camp and get some preseason reps and just stay with one team, most importantly, whether he latches onto an active roster or, which would be obviously the best thing, or even, just makes a practice squad or whatever. I would hope that it's kind of just more consistent than when he was last in the NFL.
So what's going on with John Trey? My mouth isn't working this morning. Jonte Kirkland here. What's going on with him? And obviously coming off of, the injuries and everything else. So what's he looking at?
Yeah, so John Trey Kirkland was obviously invited to Giants mini camp, as I had, pointed out, reported, whatever. But I said specifically he is not at a point yet where he is recovered to actually participate in Giants camp. So from what I understood from people on the inside was that, he was going to Giants camp just to meet with the coaches, kind of talk things over. It was more of an interview, right? Something you do during the pre-draft process, perhaps. So he went in for the interview, and it was assumed that he was going to be signed. As of now, he is yet to be signed. And again, I'm sure the injury probably has something to do with that. Even I am still sort of unclear on the severity. I've talked to John Trey on several occasions, and again, a couple other people that would know maybe more about that than I do. But the bottom line is it's going to take him some time, and it might be one of these things that lingers into the summer, which is a real shame. I really hope that he will sign or latch onto a practice squad at some point, but whether he's actually able to kind of fully participate in a training camp, or he might even miss time into the preseason, I'm not quite sure. So that definitely kind of hinders his stock, I guess you would say.
Well, it's good. I mean, people want to know, and obviously he was one of the standouts from the Roughnecks, and then going down, and one of the guys that people have been tracking down there. You also have Tim Ward, Trent Harris, and Alex Millette. Any other notes on them?
So Tim Ward was obviously a guy that got banged up in the second half of the season, but him and Trent Harris were kind of that Batman Robin duo, whatever you want to call it, 1-2 punch, coming off the edge. I mean, that defensive line was just ridiculous. And the two Roughnecks players that have signed to the NFL, CJ Brewer and Jack Heflin, both of those guys are defensive linemen. So that should tell you a lot about, the strong point of this team, especially them being coached by Bill Johnson, who won a national championship at LSU in 2019. But anyway, Trent Harris was a guy I'm really surprised, that he hasn't been signed. I think he's 27 or 28 now, but we all know the phenomenal season he had, and, he was definitely a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. But, he went to Broncos minicamp, and, he was there with other XFL guys, Jacques Patrick, Ben DiNucci, you name it. But unfortunately, he has yet to sign a contract with them. So we'll see what happens. Again, I think he has to latch on somewhere at some point. Again, this is one of those things where the rosters fill up. You kind of have to wait for a guy to, get cut or get injured or whatever the case may be for, him to be able to come in and make an impact there. And then the last guy I think I had was Alex Millette, who was invited to Seahawks minicamp. And he was an incredibly good center, not the only center that I have on this list. I definitely tried to include a couple of offensive linemen, and a lot of them ended up being centers because there were a lot of top-end centers in this league, center talent, I guess you'd say. And that is different than, tackle and guard and someone who, analyzes football at different levels a lot. We can't just – I think there's a common misconception where we just group all offensive linemen together, but there really is a difference, between, again, center, guard, tackle, and then even the sides of the line. I won't get too specific here, obviously, for time reasons, but Alex Millette was an extremely good center this season, one of the best offensive linemen in general. Again, I just said don't group all those guys together, but he was really one of the best offensive linemen on that team as a whole. Never missed a snap. He had really high PFF grades from my understanding. Again, all around just a good player. I would hope that he was, I think, with the Colts last year, but he didn't end up getting signed. I think he was a final cut there, so hope he gets back.
Well, unlike RJ Young, we do like our offensive linemen and defensive linemen here on the Markcast. So what was that when he had this all USFL players or whatever? He had no offensive linemen on there at all. So we have your Guardians, couple guys, maybe not as surprising just with some of the roster building that maybe the Guardians we would have, maybe just a few less that would stand out. Who do you have here?
Yeah, so I have two players on this list. And although I only have two players, there's a third player I'd like to give a shout-out to, and that's Cody Latimer, the tight end, who, alongside Sal Cannella, was probably the best tight end in the XFL. He's 30 now, so again, with the NFL kind of favoring age the way they do, I really don't think he's going to come back. Whether this was the last time that he played football or he comes back to the XFL last year, he hinted at that kind of in a post, I think, at some point. But, Cody Latimer was an extremely good player, second-round pick in 2014. Believe he was with the Broncos. Again, it was good to see him because, this was his first time playing really since 2019. I believe he was with the Commanders in the 2020 offseason, but obviously there was no preseason, and then he got cut, and then this is kind of the first chance he's had to play in a while. So special shout out to him. He's a great player, obviously on Max's list there. But I just think, again, this is where age kind of plays a role, and it would be a real stretch to bring him, into a camp, given all the other tight end talent that's just younger.
And then you also have here Jermaine Martin and Mac Brown here, punter Ole Miss.
Yeah, so Jermaine Martin, again, I kind of thought he was going to be the guy. Devin Darrington kind of ended up, being, I guess, the main ball carrier there. And then he went to Commanders camp as well. But Jermaine Martin was a guy I was really excited about during the pre-draft process. I think it was last year, coming out from North Carolina A&T, HBCU school. We're trying to build up, so more HBCU representation. And the XFL alone has done a great job of that, with their HBCU showcases. Last year they had one at Jackson State, obviously when Deion Sanders was there. This year they're doing it at Clark Atlanta University in Georgia, which is a Division II program. But yeah, Jermaine Martin, again, didn't exactly flash a ton this year, but I feel like he still has enough to where he could maybe get another look. And then Mac Brown, again, another punter from Ole Miss. Mac Brown, obviously, I think kind of got some clout this year, you would say, for his little trick plays and touchdowns and big passes. And that was really fun at the end of the season there. Terrell Buckley trying to shake things up for the Guardians, get something going, get something exciting. And Mac Brown really brought that. Again, punter, we've talked about it before, and I'll say it again just to really bring the point home. That's one of those positions where a team is only going to have one. It's not like receiver where they carry maybe 6 on the active roster, 5, and then a couple more on the practice squad. You kind of have to be that guy. So I don't know if Mac Brown was necessarily like the best punter in the XFL, but again, it's kind of like Marquette King, just one of those fun stories where it would be nice to just see him come in for maybe a game or two at some point and just show what he has.
Yeah, that was some of the highlights during the Guardian season. Moving on to the Brahmas here, you have Calvin Turner and Delonte Scott. What stands out about them? And I'll flip over here to the other list as well. We can see some stats.
Yeah, so Calvin Turner heading into this season was one of the most exciting players that I had personally. It's unfortunate because he didn't really end up playing this season. I think he might have been active he might have been around for a game or two, but he spent most of the season on the reserve list. And obviously, I think that had he played, he would have made a big difference in that Brahmas offense, which continuously struggled, really, regardless of the quarterback throughout the season. But yeah, Calvin Turner, a really great talent, kind of a hybrid player, running back / wide receiver. I think he projected more at wide receiver in the XFL, especially with the Brahmas running back room there with Jacquez Patrick and Kalen Balaj. But he had also taken snaps at quarterback in college at one point, I think at Jacksonville, before he came over to Hawaii. And then, again, he's just a really electric talent. And I hope he's one of these guys, again, maybe he gets another shot in the NFL, but I would be really excited if he came back to the Brahmas in 2024 and kind of really, showed why, he still is there. Because, again, he didn't have that chance this year. He was injured, and that was really, to be honest, it was almost devastating to me, again, just because, he was honestly a top 5 player for me going into this XFL season. Maybe that's a bit high. I can debate that with people, whatever. But again, that's just my personal opinion. And then Delonte Scott, defensive end, outside linebacker, edge rusher from SMU, kind of wherever we want to put that. Again, he was phenomenal to watch all season. I think his kind of production in 2023 speaks for itself. So I'm not going to talk about that for too long, but yeah, him, Calvin Turner and Delonte Scott were my 2 guys. And then Max has Drew Beasley there as well, who was definitely a good player.
Coming here with the defenders, I shouldn't surprise here, some of the highest number coming from really one of the standout teams and organizations in the XFL. Who are the couple that you want to touch on here from the defenders? Obviously, Teamu and Derek King and everyone else.
Yeah, so, this is where it gets a bit interesting, at least for me, because here I have 2 quarterbacks. We haven't talked about quarterbacks yet. Obviously, the league goes beyond quarterbacks. I shouldn't have to say that. And I myself have been guilty of talking about quarterbacks for too long. But with the defenders, I think both of their guys, honestly, deserve chances, especially Teamu. We had a debate, I think, kind of throughout the season, especially with Teamu's slow start and their reliance on the ground game in DC, whether or not this was kind of like his last gasp. But then, again, second half of the season, there was a huge uptick in production. And for me, that was enough to at least warrant him another chance in camp. Again, similar situation here to, I think, Luis Perez, where Teamu has been in a lot of these spring leagues, and he might just want to settle down and be like, me moving to another state to just go for a couple months or maybe sit on the practice squad isn't really worth it. I'd rather just, again, stay here, kind of build the team throughout the offseason with the coaches, build the program, whatever you want to call it. So I think, he's still, in my opinion, whether he wants to do that or not isn't up to me. But I think it wouldn't hurt for him to just, get a couple more preseason reps, and then come back in 2024. And then the other guy I had too was the other quarterback, Derek King, one of my, again, personal favorite players who split his time in college between Houston and Miami. He worked out with the Patriots, I think, at wide receiver last year after going undrafted. Didn't really work out. I still think he has a slim chance of playing quarterback in the NFL. I mean, he might have to still take reps at other positions if he really wants to last, like through a training camp. And that's nothing against him. Again, it's just one of these things where, the NFL favors. Again, we talked about age, but like size, D'Eriq King's a very a small guy, and you could see that. And of course, that works out in college better. But once you get to the pros, you kind of have to fill in a more niche role because like D'Eriq played this season in DC, but he wasn't necessarily the starter. And then it was very odd when they didn't play him in the championship game at all. A lot of people thought that was strange. But yeah, he was another guy. And then I think I had a couple offensive linemen on there too. Liam Fornadell, who I believe was on the All XFL team from James Madison, Mike Maietti, another center from Missouri, who might have been for me the most impressive offensive lineman on that team. And then the last two guys, I mean, Abram Smith speaks for itself. He was the first overall pick in the XFL draft, and I guess that was November now, which that's crazy to think about. But
feels
anyway,
like a really long time ago.
It does, man. It really does. But yeah, Abram Smith again, XFL leading rusher, that was a home run pick by Vaughn Hutchins and crew. I won't go on about that for too long. And then same with Francis Bernard. He was a guy who went undrafted with the Cowboys, spent 2 seasons with them, I think between 2020 and 2021. Played in a couple games. He's got a couple career NFL regular season tackles to his name. But he was a guy who really impressed me again this year too. And I think he deserves a shot to go back and at least, stay on a practice squad for another year.
Yeah, we're talking, I mean, at least right now, some of these guys like, Tiamu or Perez, these guys bouncing back and forth, at least with the hub model, kind of the same we've seen with, Makabato Thompson with the USFL, like, maybe it isn't the worst thing. Like, you move to Texas, it's not as expensive to live. You don't have to live in Seattle or any of these more expensive cities. You could have your family there, kind of train and maybe coach in the off season. I don't know. It's something to think about where the hub model, although not ideal for like everything, it does allow some more simplicity when it comes to like, well, we could kind of position everyone there and work through that. Sea Dragons here, Ja'Cour Pearson. Obviously, people know that name. What do you make of him and the other standout Sea Dragons players?
Yeah, so Ja'Cour Pearson, I mean, again, he was phenomenal this season. I think a lot of people who weren't kind of, in tune with the XFL would probably assume Josh Gordon would have been, the best receiver on that team, just given his pedigree. But Ja'Cour Pearson, I think was really a step ahead of him. That's nothing against Josh Gordon, but just to kind of, prove a point. Like sometimes just because you have a big name doesn't mean you're going to be the best player, even at your position on your own team in a league like this. Because Ja'Cour Pearson, again, one of these smaller guys, but he really emerged, split his time in college between, I think, Ole Miss for one. I think the other school is Western Kentucky. But he's gotten looks now from both the 49ers and the Seahawks, and I would expect him to be signed soon. I can't imagine, a world where he at least doesn't, get into a training camp because he really, I mean, he was just so flashy this season. And again, he really proved, I mean, he's 5'7" playing outside receiver. You don't see that very often. Again, that's one of those things where you might see it in college, but translating it to the pros, typically that's not going to work out. But for him, if he finds himself in the right offense, like again, I thought he would be a great fit in San Francisco, and they've already worked him out. And seeing some of his practice tape from the Niners camp, it looked really good. I think Shanahan must have been really impressed with him. So we'll see what happens. Again, he's with, he got invited to work out with the Seahawks as well. And, obviously that would be kind of cool just having the Sea Dragons Seahawks connection. I think especially you, Reed, would appreciate that. But then the other guy I had was Antoine Brooks, the safety from Maryland. He was kind of all around this year. I think he was the guy that had that, ridiculous interception against DC where it kind of, he kind of came down with it. It was tipped or whatever. I'd have to go back and look at that. There's so many players we have to talk about. My memory kind of gets a bit foggy. But, yeah, regardless, Antoine Brooks was definitely impressive this year and one of these guys that I believe he might have been a draft pick in the NFL. I would have to go back and, fact check that. But, came out of Maryland. I'm surprised he wasn't on the Roughnecks, actually, because, our defensive coordinator, Brian Stewart, came from Maryland. We had plenty of Maryland guys, including Sean Davis, who used to play safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But that's kind of just a side note. But yeah, those were the two guys I wanted to highlight from the Sea Dragons. There would definitely be more, but honestly, 6 of their players have already signed with the NFL. So I kind of, had to be, I was looking at the roster and I was like, geez, like a lot of the names I want to talk about are already gone. They've already signed, wherever, including DiNucci. So
Well, that's the thing. And you talk about, Jacob Pearson versus Josh Gordon. It is interesting that, Josh hasn't, at least from my knowledge, gotten a lot of looks following the season, right? And obviously, Philip Lindsay coming in as well as kind of that veteran. Hey, we're going to try to get over the hump here. Like, I know at some point it's a lot of diminishing returns with some of these older guys going back to the league and trying to kind of rebuild their stock. In terms of, we got two more teams here. In terms of the Battlehawks, no surprise, long list here. Who stands out?
So I'll just kind of go down the list accordingly here. I think I've got 5 names for this one too, and then 5 names for the Vipers. So we're getting into some longer lists now. But the first guy is Mateo Durant, kind of filled a secondary role behind Brian Hill, but did have a couple, key moments when Brian Hill was injured, stepped up, and he was invited to New York Jets minicamp, I believe. And, our colleague Pat Ruffino wrote an article about that. The two guys here that I really want to focus on are the receivers, Austin Prohl and Darius Shepard. Prohl obviously was a guy who was in XFL 2020. He's bounced around a bit, doing this and that, and, got to play for his dad this year in the XFL. His dad was receivers coach there in St. Louis, which was awesome, especially because his dad played for the Rams too, and they won that Super Bowl, and there was that picture of him, as a baby with his maybe not a baby, but a toddler. And, his dad was on the field and they won the Super Bowl. And what a full circle moment that was. And then Darius Shepard, obviously, again, just electric this year, all XFL performer, especially in the return department. And, it's so key if you want to move up to the NFL to be able to play special teams. All these guys that are trying to make a 53 or even a practice squad, it's so important to have not just special teams experience, but to be willing to play it again. You know what I mean? And Shepard kind of showed, like, not only can he, be a weapon on offense, but, he can be a weapon in the return department on special teams. Again, that's a huge deal when it comes to guys, signing from spring leagues to the NFL. And even out of college too, these guys that go undrafted or, maybe are late 7th round picks or whatever. And then, the last 2 guys I had on there, Lavert Hill from Michigan, I believe he was an all-XFL performer too. And then Mike Panashuk, the offensive center, I guess, just center for Michigan State. I believe he played defensive line in college, and, he got to play against his brother in the XFL, which was really cool. But again, another center that really stood out. And I know he might be a bit older now, but I hope that he too can, again, just find his way into a camp at least. It's for all these guys, and I will say this before we move on to our last team, which is Vegas. A lot of these guys, it's going to be difficult to just make the active roster right out of camp. You can't deny that. That's hard for anybody, that's fighting for a spot. But as long as these guys can just get signed, get some reps, get into camp, get into preseason, maybe stay on the practice squad for the course of 2023. And then, whether or not they come back to the XFL, that'll be up to them, or if they kind of just hang around in the NFL. Like, that's not up to me. But I just hope that, the point here is not to say all these guys are going to be on NFL active rosters. And, that's just a unrealistic assumption. But the bottom line is, again, as long as these guys can at least just get some sort of reps at the NFL level, that would be important.
30 seconds of thought about AJ McCarron. I think he's obviously another one, like Perez here. Let's build something here. Let's really kind of invest. I don't see him bouncing back. I mean, obviously he turned down the contract. What do you make about AJ McCarron? Brief thoughts.
Yeah, McCarron's a guy that I think is going to stay around now. Had you asked me that at the beginning of the season, I said, nah, he would have been in an NFL camp by this point. But, it's clear, again, age is one of these things. AJ really appreciated his time in the XFL. You can just tell that by his demeanor. And the whole point of him being there was to, watch his kids play. And he can happily do that again next year. I mean, he's already made so much money through the NFL, having won all those national championships, Alabama, being a draft pick, hanging around for, X many seasons. I think he was drafted in 2014, maybe earlier than that. But yeah, he's been around for a long time. And at this point, I think his kids enjoyed seeing him play, his entire family. Really, it's a personal thing. So it would be great to have him back in 2024. And I know Beck is definitely open to that. I'm sure everyone on that coaching staff and the rest of the team that's going to be there in 2024 is open to that, because he was a phenomenal talent. And he definitely played with a lot of emotion, again, given his circumstance, I guess, this year.
Well, and I see him very easily transitioning to like the Battlehawks just coaching staff, here. He was already basically kind of working with Bruce and calling the plays and all that. Last year we got the Vipers, Jalen McClendon, a couple of friends at the show here, Jeff Badette, Deontay Anderson, who joined us for our I guess it was our championship pregame show. Who stands out from the Vipers there?
Yeah, so Jalen McClendon, this one can be debated. He was invited to Bill's minicamp along with Quentin Dormady from the Guardians. Again, two sort of underdogs in the XFL. At Newsub, we're talking about our underdog award. It came down to Jalen McClendon or Quentin Dormady because those guys, kind of took, I guess you'd say, bottom end teams and at least made them somewhat competitive in the this kind of later part of the season. But McClendon, it's a long shot for him. He was last. I think he bounced around. It was with, Washington and then maybe Baltimore in 2019. And then obviously he was with the Wildcats in XFL 2020. I've gone on record, talking about how that Joey Clinkscales connection with him being the DPP in Vegas really helped him out this year more than any, because I don't think people understand, how crazy it was for Jalen McClendon to come in and play like that, because he had really, he had maybe played like a combined, I don't know, like at most, it's probably 30 snaps between NFL preseason and XFL 2020. I mean, he was just not there a lot. So to see him, go out there and really, prove everybody wrong, he was even a step above Brett Hundley, you could argue. And I know the whole Hundley situation is still kind of weird. We don't know exactly what happened to him, whether it was injury or he had a problem with the coaching staff. But even then, it was clear, he was better than Brett Hundley even when Hundley was playing. And that, raised the question, maybe they should have just stuck with him the whole season. Of course, Perez was there, and eventually they traded him. So it was a complex issue. But the bottom line is, Jalen McClendon, I do think, again, deserves to be at least in an NFL preseason. And, when it comes to quarterbacks, we've mentioned it already on this show, just kind of like the Luis Perez and the Jordan Ta'amus of the world. Maybe it's better if he comes back in 2024 and just develops and stays there, with the coaching staff or whatever. But, the good what am I going to say? The chances are that, he goes to an NFL camp, maybe gets cut after that, or the preseason, he's maybe a final cut, and then he just comes right back into everything in September. So he wouldn't have ended up missing that much time. That's the key thing here, too, with all these players. If they want to come back in 2024, if you don't make it past final cuts, final cuts are at the end of August, early September. It's not that far away. You're not going to be dragged out for months, and then you're not going to have to make some, key decision right before the XFL season, okay, am I going to play? Because you're going to have a lot of time to think about it during the NFL season if you're a free agent, as long as you don't get signed to a practice squad or whatever. But anyway, that's kind of a bit of a different tangent for another time. The other guys I have on this list, DeAndre Torrey, running back from North Texas, again, kind of in a somewhat reserve role with Vegas, but he only went undrafted last year. Signed with the Michigan Panthers. He kind of took the spring football route immediately, as opposed to testing the waters with the NFL. And then from there he went to Eagles camp, and then now he surfaced back in spring football. I think he deserves another shot, even if the numbers weren't incredible. Jeff Badette from Oklahoma. Badette is one of these guys that we've always pulled for, incredible individual, incredible human. This season really, I think for him, and I don't want to take the words out of his mouth, but it really felt like it was sort of a, how do I put this? It was like a, hard work pays off type of thing. And maybe that just sounds, very vague, but what I mean here is he dealt with several injuries, and he was on your show talking about, in the USFL last year, he was depressed, being away from home at the hub and whatever. That format just didn't work for him. And then in the XFL in 2020, he was with the Renegades, but he dealt with injuries there too. And it's just, he's always kind of been dealt, the wrong cards, if you know what I mean. And finally, for once, even if his team didn't win that many games, he still had a lot of tape and a lot of, highlights to show, for it. And I think, again, he's an older guy now. It's been a couple years since he was in the NFL, but this is one of those things where it's just one more chance. If he gets one more camp or whatever, I think that would be really good to see, because he, in my opinion, is incredibly deserving of that opportunity.
Yeah. Very unhappy with his time with the USFL, and I think very happy that he could play. When he said on the show, he said, I need one season uninjured. Let me get my tape. Let me get my highlights. And he certainly did that.
Exactly. Yep. And that's exactly what he did. So good for him. Love Jeff, great guy. Anyway, last two guys on this list, Pita Tamapenu, XFL Defensive Player of the Year from Utah. Pita was, I think NFL scouts had eyes on him, throughout the entire season. And it would be great, to see Pita, to me, he could be one of these guys that, one of the few that ends up just making the active roster right out of a training camp, because to me, he really was that impressive. And it would be a great story, for the XFL to have a guy, make an impact on an NFL team in the regular season after his team in the XFL wasn't that great. You know what I mean? Because sometimes there's a misconception where it's like, the champion or, the playoff teams are going to have more players go to the NFL. I don't necessarily think that's true. And again, that's not to, fault any teams or to say that, certain teams don't have NFL caliber players, because at the end of the day, I'd say a large majority of the players in these leagues, whether it's XFL, USFL, or CFL, or NFL caliber. But yeah, a guy like Peter Taumapanu, I could definitely see him, making an active roster. The performance, spoke for itself. In the league, it was a bit surprising to see him win Defensive Player of the Year outright. I would have pulled for Trent Harris again, whether I'm biased or not. But a couple of other people were surprised who are well versed in this space. And then the last guy I had on that list was Deontay Anderson, and that's someone I've been talking to a lot lately. Love Deontay. Obviously, he was on your show at the Riverwalk in San Antonio there for the championship. Deontay's interesting. He went to Raiders minicamp 2 years ago. They tried him out at linebacker because I believed he played linebacker his senior season at Houston. Didn't work out. He doesn't like playing linebacker on the inside. This season, to me, in the XFL proved that he can play safety at a higher level, because he was the leading tackler amongst defensive backs, but he also had, I think, 9 pass deflections. Again, I see him he proved that he can play in coverage. He's not just a guy, that moves up front on the line. He can definitely, play further back and fill a coverage role. So we'll see what happens. Again, I know he just got an agent and he's working through things. But I would definitely be excited, to see him at least, again, just getting a camp. And I know he's content with coming back in 2024 if it does come to that. And I think a lot of these guys, again, that we're talking about, I brought it up earlier, guys that that go, even if they do go to NFL camps, that doesn't necessarily mean they're done with the XFL forever. They can easily come back in 2024, make an impact. You saw it in the USFL, guys who went, who were in the first season in the USFL last year, went to NFL camps, and then came back to the USFL after it didn't work out. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's all about, getting reps and furthering your career. Everyone always says, when they're a kid, I want to play in the NFL. And, whether you count preseason reps or a training camp as, playing in the NFL, again, that's something that's debated a lot, I think, in circles. But, the bottom line is if you're going to, if the NFL calls and you're playing in the XFL, you're definitely going to take that opportunity. And it's great to see the XFL promote that. That's the other thing I'll bring up here, as we close this out, I think, is just, the league. I think we said during the season they might have pushed the narrative a bit too much. It's like, oh, well, this guy, it was all about the NFL and not about, his actual production on his XFL team. And to an extent, I agree with that, but it's also good, to not see the league just completely shy away. Again, I think some of their partnerships help, like with the NFL Alumni Academy, they have a strong connection there, personnel-wise. So, yeah, ultimately, I think it's good that the league is – and again, they're posting, when guys sign in the NFL. Could they do maybe a better job, with that being more consistent? Perhaps you could argue that way. But again, every time a player gets signed, they have been, posting on XFL PR, they'll make the graphic, they'll put it up on the XFL socials, this guy, it's like XFL to NFL. And I think the greatest thing that they've done really so far with that is, they're doing YouTube stuff with that. They're making, these little short documentaries. Like they had a couple of the DPPs talking, like Vaughn Hutchins, Randy Mueller, Mark Lillibridge, going on about, some of their players that really impressed them. It's kind of like a player spotlight. And that helps NFL teams too, just to get an idea of what they're looking at. So I think, yeah, again, all around it's a great structure there.
Yeah, I think just to wrap this up, I think, like you said, pushed a little too hard the narrative. I think if the XFL and the USFL could change it a little bit where, for however many decades now, it's kind of like it's the NFL or bust. And if you don't make it to the NFL, you're SOL and your life is over. Like changing the narrative, no, we are creating these other places, like these landing spots for you, whether you do want to play there for years, you want to play here for a year, you want to play here for a few weeks, kind of get back, just to not have it be this all or bust kind of thing, I think is important to kind of build that narrative around. And, we're working on it. I think both these leagues are still trying to figure out how they want to frame that. Evan, and tremendous work here. Your knowledge of all of these players astounds me. I know I talk with Dorothy afterwards. She's like, how do they know all these people. I said, well, this is what Evan does. I appreciate Max putting the list together as well. Some notes on there. Evan, anything else from you before we get out of here?
Yeah, I'll just go off your point quickly again about, sort of these guys, building resumes through these leagues. The one thing that I thought was really cool was, especially from the spring football standpoint, there were guys who won the championship with the Arlington Renegades this year that were on the Birmingham Stallions in the USFL last year. Doug Costin, Victor Bolden, I think there was a couple other guys. But anyway, guys are able to win championships in these leagues now. That wasn't a thing a couple years ago. Like the last time you had that was, really the UFL. I mean, yeah, the Spring League had theirs, but, where does the Spring League fall again? You can argue with that. But like the AAF never completed their season. XFL 2020 didn't complete their season. So now you finally see guys, I think they're able to be more emotionally attached. And that's what I really hope for, these players as the leagues move forward. It's like they can really get attached to these teams. And it's not just about, waiting on that call from the NFL. I'm just here in the meantime. It's like, well, you might end up playing here for like 2-3 years. So, really try and, commit to the team. And I'm not saying guys aren't committed. I'm just saying I think it depends a lot on, and I've talked about this with other people, it depends for the player, whether they've been in the NFL or not before, because some guys have had a ton of NFL experience. Look at like Martavis Bryant, the Josh Gordons of the world. And then, I don't know, you look at maybe like a Bryson Aline, who's never really touched the NFL. So there's a couple of different perspectives there. But the bottom line is, the more emotionally attached guys get, the better the football will be. At least that's what I think personally.
Yeah, I think you can just feel like your heart is a little bit more protected to be invested in this now, just with the success the USFL's had, and now with the XFL completing. Like, you're not wasting your time here. I can be invested. I can be a part of this. I can, like we've talked with AJ McCarron and Luis Perez or Tiamu, like I feel like I could build something here for a couple years and kind of know it's going to be around. Evan with News Hub, appreciate it all season. I'm sure we'll do lots more of this throughout the summer, but really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Reed. This was definitely fun to talk about some players. As always. It always is.
Well, we're going to have good beard energy on the podcast today. I feel like we have Furby here. Normally we have Justin Freeman over at RunTheSims. Today, Justin said Furby's the guy we're talking to. We're getting USFL Week 8 and everything else. How are you doing, sir?
Good. How are you doing, Reed?
I'm good. So what are, we're here approaching Week 8. Pat Ruffino and I have been kind of doing our, Monday recaps here the last little bit. What are you making of USFL Season 2?
It's good. It's a lot like Season 1. I thought they might like kind of spice it up a little bit. Year 1, you kind of give them a free pass on some stuff, but then year 2, you think you might make some changes. And so far, it's kind of felt exactly the same. Starting to feel a little formulaic. I, for some reason, I'm a psycho and leave all the notifications on Twitter for all the teams to get the notifications and stuff. But so I start to see, it's like the same tweet over and over for all the teams. You kind of wonder if that's a little bit of Fox. If you ever watch like a Fox sitcom, season 11, it kind of becomes very formulaic. And maybe that's kind of what they want. They want this, for TV product, so they're not really necessarily trying to switch it up.
Did you watch or enjoy the XFL this year?
I did. And I think it kind of had, it was in its first year too. So, it kind of had the new car smell also. And now USFL, I don't think it's stale necessarily, but, it's in its second year. So, I think the football is good, though.
I'm a known supposed USFL hater on here, and so it's either I was kind of walk in line with that.
I've heard.
No, but I've said I don't always agree with the XFL's personality, right? I think sometimes they try to be a little bit too serious. The broadcast, people have issues with the ESPN broadcast, but at least it feels like it has a little bit of an identity where it does feel like this is, like you said, not. I wouldn't say stale, but like this is safe. Like we have 4 games that are very family friendly and you can watch and you kind of know what to expect. And it's kind of like pizza and it's always going to be fine, but it might not be exceptional or poor.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think XFL, maybe they're trying to build a little more. And I think USFL, they're probably kind of content, having it like this. This is a TV spot for Saturday, Sunday, as long as their ratings are good. They're not going to leave money on the table. but they're not quite as willing to take some of the risks, moving cities out of the hub into their hometowns, stuff like that.
So we had the USFL had the press conference this morning. This will air obviously Friday, but kind of previewing the playoffs and, okay, we've got this going on in Canton and everything else. Really championing the parity of all 8 teams, and it's also kind of up in the air going in. What have you made of the level of competition with the parity of the all 8 teams?
I'm fine with the parity. I just think everyone, some of the teams just kind of lack identity. In the XFL, you kind of had the defenders run first. Their defense was really good. You had the Roughnecks. They're just going to sling it. Seattle is just going to sling it around the field. I don't mind everyone having the same wins and losses, kind of close in the standings, but I just don't know if they have the identity that they did last year. Even
you feel you think they had more of an identity in season 1?
I think so. And you don't want teams like Pittsburgh last year where they're just terrible, and a little bit like Orlando in the XFL where that's not even competitive. You certainly always want competitive, but I just look, you look at, rushing yards per game, and there's a few outliers, but almost everybody's within, 40, 50 yards of each other after 7 weeks.
In terms of teams, carried over, obviously, like Stars kind of feel like they're finding their footing now. Birmingham's looked good, where we had kind of New Orleans was the standout. Now they're kind of faltering. I had McLeod on the show a couple weeks ago, so I blame the kind of the undefeated Ray and ending on that. But what teams have you been impressed by thus far coming into the season?
I think I was really high on the Breakers to start, like you said, and they've kind of tapered off a little bit. The Panthers have shown spurts, and the Gamblers, I guess, have shown spurts of being a pretty good team. But like you said, the parity kind of makes everybody kind of a muddle, I think the Stallions are the cream of the crop in the South there, though.
So, and feeling like they're kind of finally they had a little bit going early on, but now Magoo's looking good. Everything else. I mean, what stood out to you about the Stallions?
Really just Magoo. I mean, he's clearly the MVP so far, and he hasn't really separated through the air. But just standing back, he's calm. He's making plays. He'll scramble. He's not looking to run first. But he just converts third downs, runs when they need him, makes it look easy right now.
In terms of the Breakers and McLeod, have you been impressed? Did you track any of his CFL-ness before he came into the league?
I didn't track him in the CFL, and lots of times, the stats are hard to translate. You always think, oh, he's coming from the CFL, he's going to do really good. It's kind of doesn't always translate like people expect it to be like AAA baseball. You go to MLB, you're going to like have a certain ratio. And it's not always like that with CFL. Some guys just kind of, it translates better and sometimes it doesn't. So I wasn't sure how that was going to work out. And at first, it looked pretty good, and they've kind of, I don't know what it is. They just hit a wall a little bit. It seems like the stats are still there for the most part, but they're just kind of not making some of the third down, fourth downs, makes it look a little bit worse than it is.
It seems, we've kind of pontificated. Maybe he's hitting the wall, kind of coming off of the CFL and fatigue and playing. And I mean, that's something with these spring leagues. And obviously he had the time off from November, but he was injured in the Grey Cup, takes time off, gets his hand figured out, comes back in here. And it does seem like it's not really the same energy that was going in the first, 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah. And I mean, that team in general has been pretty banged up and getting late. And guys that aren't hurt, like Hills has just been having a massive workload. You got to think there's going to be some fatigue there as well. And Dixon was hurt, and he's a big part of the offense. I think they're starting to come back around. They were pretty close. Every game's been close. And, a couple, a touchdown, a couple plays each game, and we're not really having this conversation.
With Coach DiFilippo, have you, as the first year kind of spring football coach here, figuring all this out, have you been impressed with his work?
I have. I think I prefer seeing the first year guys rather than, some of the old, NFL veterans, guys that are on their way up rather than kind of on their way out. Sometimes I think they're just kind of looking, the old guys are more looking for, just a 9-to-5 job. They're probably not grinding film at 12:30 in the morning on a Tuesday night. I think you see that with maybe last year with a couple of the coaches, but
Larry Fedora, maybe a little bit there.
Yeah.
In terms of Todd Haley here, twerking in the locker room now, the team undefeated. Are we liking what Coach Haley's been putting together with the Showboats?
I mean, it's working apparently, but I kind of had Haley pegged as one of those coaches maybe last year, but I think you're seeing a little bit more that, he's not just, sitting on the ball. I think he does want to win, and they've made, I think, 7 of 8 fourth downs in the last 4 games. I mean, things that aren't sustainable, but it's certainly been fun, seeing that turnaround. A lot of positive vibes.
Obviously, a lot of parity here in the South, especially. Gamblers kind of trying to find their footing with, Bahar and everything else. What do you make of, Stallions figure number 1? Who's going to get that second seed in the South?
Yeah, it's certainly Stallions up top. I think the Breakers will figure it out. I kind of think the Showboats will be a little closer to the first 2 games than the first 3 games rather than the last 4, but it'll be somewhere in the middle. Same with the Gamblers. I see Stallions being on top, and then the Breakers.
In terms of here, Stars, kind of finally figuring out what they want to do. Panthers still can't win at home, and they've even talked about that today on the USFL press conference. I thought that was funny. They were a little self-aware of that, but General's really kind of out of it. We had DeAndre Johnson get banged up, and the Maulers here continuing the Maul. Is it Stars, Panthers without a doubt here, or what do you make of the North?
I think it's definitely Stars, and then I think Panthers, but I don't know if Love has more up games than down games. They also just signed EJ Perry, so that could be interesting.
Yeah, do you like Love? Do you like Love as a quarterback?
I don't think. I think he's looked all right. I think, where is he? But I wouldn't mind seeing a change there. I was surprised they didn't give Barrier a little more look, but they obviously had no interest in seeing. I thought Barrier looked pretty good last year. Kind of gave him two dimensions, but they weren't interested there. So he's on the Generals now. So without DeAndre, maybe he'll get a shot there.
Yeah, honestly, it really seems like they're kind of grasping at straws there. Generals obviously had to make a move with that, but I don't know if it's too little too late here to kind of refresh their, is that enough time to get him in and get going here before the end of the season?
I don't know. I guess it worked with Perez in Arlington. But I don't know that Barrier is Perez, kind of a very different player. And they haven't put DeAndre Johnson on the inactive list yet. Now, he was DNP yesterday with a concussion, and it would be really bad optics, after the scene, looked really bad, went to the hospital, kind of had like kind of Tua vibes where it would look really bad if he played, put the league kind of at risk a little bit. But I would expect him to be back within a couple weeks, though. So I would imagine they stick with him going forward because Laletta just has not looked very good.
I'd be curious kind of how they handle him in terms of, with the active bonuses and thing. Like I don't know if that goes into that. I think they had that last year with when Brian Scott got injured and they kind of kept him on. I don't know. I think they do a little bit of tweaking like that to make sure guys are getting paid a little bit more. I don't know if that goes into it at all, if they just want to keep him on and not worry about transferring that out, but something to kind of keep in mind there with the Generals.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the matchups here we have going into the weekend, week 8, this might not be the prettiest matchup here. The 9 a.m. Pacific, USA of the Gamblers Maulers. Who do you have in this one?
The Gamblers are favored by 3, and I think that seems about right. At that line, I'd probably go with the Gamblers, but both teams are 1 and 2 in pressures and sacks. And the Maulers have taken the second most sacks in the league. So it might be pretty ugly in terms of offense.
It's weird. It's weird that, the legacy of the Maulers has kind of continued on here.
Yeah. But
Roy Horton and everything else not being able to turn that around. Stars, Stallions, this might be the standout game of the weekend here on the NBC. I think this is going to do pretty well ratings-wise at noon Pacific here with the Stars at Birmingham. What are you making of this one?
Yeah, this could very well be championship preview. Stars are favored by a touchdown almost, but so Stallions are over the Stars. And I think the story is the Stars' offensive line. They were just atrocious through 5 games. And then the last 2 games, they allowed 0 sacks to the Maulers and then 1 sack to the Breakers. Looking a lot better. They could not get the ball going at all on the ground. And then the last 2 weeks, they've kind of gotten Colburn, is kind of the lead dog now. Dexter Williams was mixing in some, but it looks kind of like all Colburn now, and they're doing a lot better the last couple of weeks.
Well, Corbin's been great. I mean, he's been good. We've tracked him all the way through everything going up. Good pieces there. It feels like they're finally getting right here. Slow start, and I don't know if Case was slow coming back or Bart was kind of snoozing on the sidelines. It feels like they're finally kind of getting their footing here.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of here, the June 4th, Sunday, double Fox, I think the ratings will obviously peak up over last week. We've had probably a season low here for the USFL ratings coming out of week 7. But the Showboats and the Generals here, I have to imagine the Showboats are favored.
Yeah. Well, the Showboats are 2-point dogs now. For some reason, it opened as the Showboats as favorites, and now it's flipped. The Generals are 2-point favorites, and I couldn't figure that one out either. I don't know if it was a DeAndre Johnson thing or so. I would certainly be on the Showboats side of that.
I would bet that immediately. I mean, you have your starting quarterback injured here, and I guess they trade and all that, but I certainly don't think that they bring that up here that quick. I don't think that seems odd to me. Is the home field advantage of Tom Benson that great?
Mm-hmm. No, but yeah, their Generals are 2-point favorites right now.
And then here, Michigan at New Orleans. This is probably the other standout game. I think the Fox has lacked a little bit in the ratings compared to NBC, but I imagine this afternoon game is going to go well. Panthers at Breakers. Panthers are not in, Detroit, so they can certainly win here. What do you make of this one?
It's time for the Breakers to end the Markcast curse, I guess. It's been the Wes Hillis show so far, from a team you think's just going to pass it all the time. They've been running quite a bit. They've had some success, but still come up short in a win column. And like we mentioned earlier, I think Hillis just has to be getting tired. They gave him a little bit of rest. I don't know. I think he fumbled it for once there, and they went to Jones for a little bit, but I think they're just going to go back to him. I mean, his workload has just been outrageous.
Looking here, moving into the playoffs here, a couple weeks left to the regular season playoffs. What are you looking for from any of these teams before we get out of here? Who would you like to see? You think Birmingham and Philadelphia at the end?
I think that's who it's going to be. They're certainly the most fun teams, the best offenses. Birmingham defense, I think their reputation has been a lot stronger than their actual performance on defense this year. But I think if they can do that, they're certainly the favorite.
Well, Furby, I appreciate it. If people want to learn more about you, kind of what you guys do over at RunTheSims, where would you have them check out?
RunTheSims.com. You can check out me at Furby Hubler on Twitter. And we have stuff for USFL, XFL. We'll have some NFL preseason. We mostly DFS, betting, prop tools. It's a lot of fun.
Has the USFL interest exceeded or disappointed your expectations this season?
Disappointed. I think, especially on DraftKings, is XFL started out, about where USFL did last season, and then I think people were just exhausted. XFL started with $100,000 to first place, and now we're down to about $2,000 to first place. So I think the interest has dwindled quite a bit, and DraftKings just has given up on the USFL product, price wise, and the player pools. Like a couple weeks ago, they haven't figured out the difference between the inactive list and like guys that were inactive one week, they just don't even add them to the player pool. So I think they've mostly given up on the product, but it's been fun though.
Do you attribute that to a problem with the USFL product, or just a general fatigue in spring football that we've done this now for 20 weeks?
It's both, and it's kind of it just kind of keeps building, they cut the prize pool so less people are interested. And then I don't expect DraftKings to keep taking a huge, cut themselves. So, you make the prize pool smaller, and then less people want to play. So they have to make the next week the prize pool even smaller, and it keeps getting smaller and smaller. But I'd say, in the interest in spring football or in the USFL has been a little bit less than XFL. So it's just been, it's been a grind. And then NFL, you're starting to get to mini camps and stuff, and people are starting to do best ball drafts. So there's other places to play, other games to play.
It's interesting. I use, all these metrics and ratings and attendance and YouTube kind of traffic I see. And obviously this is another one of that. So I always appreciate those insights as well. Well, Furby, thank you so much. And hope you enjoy. You got to I hope you enjoy the rest of the season. You seem a little down, but we got to grind through here.
I do enjoy it. I didn't want to come across it.
It's good.
It's a lot of fun.
It's this long. We've been doing it. Yeah, it's been 20 since February. Now we're working through. Well, Furby, I appreciate it so much.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Well, last time we spoke, I think I was in the Flamingo over in Vegas. Now I'm relegated to my living room. We have the lawnmower outside here. We have JJ Adams here with the Postmedia. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I do remember you throwing that in my face that you were in Vegas having like the time of your life when I was stuck. I remember this. I got the memory like an elephant. I will never forget that. Nor will I forget, but it's good to see you again, RJ. It's good to talk.
Yeah, well, much more stable connection here back at Markcast headquarters than over at the Flamingo. I think I was on a hot spot that day. So anyway, here we're doing team breakdowns. We had Ryan Ballantyne on last week talking Calgary. Obviously, we have to talk America's CFL team, the BC Lions here. JJ is the person I want to talk to. How are you feeling? We've had the one preseason game. I mean, I know wins and losses and all of that, but what are you making of the team so far?
I'm encouraged. I think they brought a lot of the veteran flavor that they had from last year. The guys that were like, second year players are now third year. They're entering that kind of impact kind of zone of their career. So I think, they've got a lot of returners. They picked up some good free agents. They didn't lose too many pieces. And if they did, they might've found some replacements. James Butler came into his own last year for the Lions, and they had to sort of start from scratch here. So we'll see what they have in running back. They lost Figueroa to Hamilton as well. So big veteran piece on the line. But of course, they picked up Michael Couture at center. So, they got some more experience there. I think this is going to be a team that's going to be challenging for top in the West again. And that is, even without Mr. Nathan Rourke. I think Big Play VA is a capable quarterback, and now that he's had like a training camp under his belt, he's got some time, a little runway. The team is unquestionably his to start the season. Unquestionably his. I think he'll feel very confident, and that can only help him, sort of get into routine and rhythm and really be Big Play VA and live up to that nickname.
You said that to start the season, are you foreshadowing a Dane Evans takeover here, or do you mean just off of last season with him? Because I want to talk Dane too, but yeah, Vernon was on the show post-season, and I think people really underestimate the emotional toll that is of like he was talking to you. I'm moving across the country. I'm paying rent here. I've got my house here. He lives down in Tacoma, like basically a stone's throw from me. Like there was a lot going into that besides even just football.
Yeah, no, it was a tough move. Like he was, he fell out of favor in Montreal, and the promises that were kept or not kept, he just found himself, stuck. And when someone sort of questions your capabilities and what you can do, of course, it's going to impact your confidence. And then came over in mid-season to a team that had one of the best quarterbacks this league has seen ever. I'll just say it was one season, 1.5 seasons, but I'll say it. It was remarkable. So that's a tough situation to come into, knowing that if that guy comes back, you're going to be relegated to the bench again. Now, he is, he's got that off season under his belt. I'm sure you heard about the Lion Kings camp down in Tacoma where he flew in all the guys. He loves to do that. Lots of bonding. He's sort of ingrained in the culture of the team there. He's a leader on the team now. So I don't think we'll see that Vernon Adams that we saw last year that was, very tentative and conservative. You would see him hold on to the ball just way too long, and you'd be yelling at the screen, throw the ball, or yelling from the and, he'd get sacked or run around or something like that. I don't think we're going to see that VA this year. I think he is going to sort of throw back to his more successful days, and he's got so many weapons at his disposal. I mean, it would be nearly impossible for him to like fall on his face with that kind of with those kind of options out there. So I foresee a very good season for him, and if not, they have Dane Evans, your guy.
Well, I don't want Vernon to do anymore. I think he did like the backflip somersault or whatever when he was like running out of bounds. I think it was against Calgary, and he did like I would go, okay, Vernon, like, I thought he was gonna like get seriously injured here, like just hit the
half. Yeah, it was crazy.
I like the Lion Kings thing and the arrow up, and I've talked with Nick and Matt about it. It's fascinating to me to track just to watch the little personality nuances between all of those guys, and like. I don't, I love Vernon, and I think people love Vernon, but Vernon's a lot, right? A lot comes with Vernon, both, on the field and then off, and just the personality. I like watching all that. They did a similar thing with the USFL, and we saw Brian Scott, the quarterback there, and, you kind of saw he was having to have like a house meeting, kind of trying to talk to some of the wide receivers. And, I kind of, I don't know. We'll see. I like it. They're complicated. You've got, Lucky Whitehead and guys that have been in the NFL and coming back. It's curious to see kind of how they all interact.
Yeah, no, I mean, Vernon is a leader. He really is a leader. I mean, you saw that in the work that they did with the Lion Kings when they were sitting down and he was interacting with everyone. And he has a track record of doing that. I mean, he did that in Montreal. Off season, flew in guys, put them in a hotel, practiced with them. So that's kind of a role that he's really comfortable with. And I think he'll evolve into that leader again now that he is the number one. As long as he doesn't, like you say, get folded in half, trying to do something crazy, scrambling out of the backfield.
The Dane Evans thing, I remember when he got signed and kind of took me by surprise. I just thought there would be maybe a hotter market for Dane, and him coming in seems happy. He's in all the documentary stuff too, and obviously he played. What do you make of that? Is it just, hey, he didn't have anywhere else to go? It doesn't hurt to have another person there. Do you think he's really going to compete?
No, I think absolutely he's going to compete. I think, Vernon is the number one guy, but, iron sharpens iron. So having those guys together is only going to make them better. And, the Lions saw what happens if you have a number one quarterback and he gets hurt and there's really nothing behind it. You saw what happened when they tried to, rotate in the guys that they had last year. So now they have a guy who is a capable starter in this league, and he'll be pushing for number one. I think, heading into the season, this is definitely going to be Vernon's turn, but having Dane there, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a great room. Everyone on the team, talks about this culture that they have there, where it's like a family atmosphere. They're all brothers and they're all trying to lift each other up. So I don't think there's any of that sort of competition. He doesn't find himself like in that situation he was in Montreal, where he felt sidelined and kind of left out. Everyone's included. So I think it can only be a good thing for the Lions to have Dane on the team. And I am, like you, a little surprised there wasn't a hotter market from out there. But, we'll see what those other teams do in this season with the guys they brought in.
I am very excited to see Cody Fajardo in Montreal. I am very excited to see what that looks like, and I know that's a conversation for a different team breakdown. But the Cody Fajardo, who now is a friend of the podcast, Cody, we were not on speaking terms for a little while, but Cody's back in the family here, and I'm excited. I like Montreal; they're my team of the East, and we've had Gary on the podcast, so I like Montreal, and I hope Cody finds success there, speaking French and doing everything else.
What did you do to Cody to make him an enemy? I need to know.
I retweeted the 3 Down Nation article, the one where he was talking. He used chicken nuggets as opposed to curse words, and I think Cody went on a spree and just found anyone that was associated with that article and just went on the block. And so I apologized. I said I accept all of that, and yeah, Cody came on the show. It was great. It was a good time.
It's funny. Vernon has had a bone to pick with 3 Down Nation too. We came to BC. And anytime in the post game, the 3 Down Nation writers would ask a question, answer was always the same. Got to look at the film. Didn't matter the question. You could ask anything. What kind of chicken soup do you like? Got to watch the film. I don't know. It was hilarious to see. It was JC Abbott from 3 Down Nation. Watch him sweat trying to ask all these detailed questions, and Vernon just be like, got to watch the film, man. He's awesome. I love it.
JC's still not. John Hodge was on the show last week, so I'm slowly working my way up. I think JC is like the ultimate boss battle there, so we're working our way up through the 3 down ranks. But trying to be friends in terms of big losses, Butler, all of that. I'm very scared because I didn't think BC. They have not run the ball well. I felt like in the last couple of years. Obviously, he had a standout year, but I'm scared of that loss and kind of what they're going to do there.
Yeah, I mean. JB was a big loss. Like, he really came into his own last year. But if you remember the year before, he wasn't that great. And I think last year was the first year since like the Andrew Harris days that they had like 1,000-yard rusher. And so, historically they haven't run the ball well. The guys that they had 5 guys to start camp. They whittled it down to 4 right away. I think it was Vaughn Watson couldn't come up because he had a baby, and then whittled that down to 3, and then they released Buddy Howell not too long ago. So it's Antonio Williams and Smoke Mazzell. I think Williams has got the ability to be a very good back in this league. I think he's got the inside track to be a starter because he's the biggest of the bunch. He's close to 6 foot. He's 200 pounds, and blocking is such a huge thing in this league because you pass so much that they need a guy who can provide that protection for their quarterback. And also he's like a very powerful running. Like he can lower his pads and like get through some arm tackles and gain those extra yards. So combine that with, athleticism. He's fast. We saw a little bit in the preseason game what he and Smoke could do. But definitely, he's a guy that can really do anything you ask. Smoke is more of that sort of hybrid kind of guy. He's a very good receiver. He's a good runner. He can return kicks. He's not huge. I think he was the smallest of the 5 guys that they brought in. But, I mean, he is shifty. He's fast. He'll provide a very good change of pace to Williams. So I think they're going to be set. And, we talk about replacing James Butler, but, 2 years ago, they didn't have James Butler. They had to develop him. So I think we're going to see the same thing with these guys. And hopefully, we don't know. We don't know until the rubber hits the road what they're going to do. But I think they're going to be, pretty much set at running back this season.
In terms of the Lions, kind of carrying on from last year, and I know they're going to announce the band here for I think halftime of the preseason game, they're going to announce for the kickoff and all of that. But in terms of, I know, Mar Doman was really into all the FSU stuff, and we've had Jim Mullen on talking about that and kind of building the grassroots and all of that in the community. Do you feel like the Lions are going to be able to carry over the momentum they had last year with Rourke, just in terms of like popularity in the community?
I think that Rourke's magnificent season really, the spark was already there. The excitement was there with having new ownership that was involved, having new ownership that was, at the grassroots level, handing out scarves and swag at flag football games, sponsoring the flag football leagues. The Lions hadn't had that for a while, so that kind of started the embers a little bit, breathed some life back into the team, and then Nathan Rourke was just like gasoline, and just boom, there was just this massive interest in the team. And I don't know who their halftime or show will be for the home opener, but they keep teasing it, and I think hopefully it won't be Chilliwack again. I think their demographic, they did get their demographic a little lower. Not that there's anything wrong with classic rock, but let's make it a little lower. I think they're really making an effort to scratch and claw their way back into like the number 2 spot in Vancouver sports. Like, no one's going to be touching the Canucks because the Canucks are the Canucks, but the Whitecaps are in a very popular league, especially in the States. I think it's like the number 3 league down there now. So interest is rising in that. Lions have been lucky in that the Whitecaps have been terrible for a decade, no success. So if they can get some wins on the board, and like last year, challenge for a Grey Cup, make it to the playoffs, make some noise, that's gonna even give them a bigger ramp into season 4 with Amar, or season 3. So I think absolutely last year, huge fire. The interest is still there, even though Nathan has gone to the NFL now. I think there's still a lot of interest in this team, and with what they're doing, just to make it an experience for everybody. So yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be even better than last year.
Well, because I think Nathan, phenomenal talent. Nathan wasn't exactly the most electric personality, right? And he was on, the show pre kind of that season and all of that. But, I think with Vernon and Keon and Lucky, and even Dane to some extent, I think, Dane's had stories in the past talking about his upbringing and kind of his heritage and everything. Like, I think you have a really marketable team there. If they can perform even modicumly well, whatever, on the field, I think you have a lot of stars there that you can build around. Because like Lucky Whitehead is like, I've been to I don't care. Like, I'll do whatever I want. And like, I'm doing sidelines. Like, it gives him that swagger where like he's still all in, but you can tell he's a little bit above kind of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. You just have to look at his, everyone's wondering, how is he going to get to the game? How is he going to enter the game? Is it going to be on horseback? Is it going to be on an ice cream cart? Is it going to be on a unicycle? It's just that fun kind of modern social media content, and with a great personality like Lucky, it's just it's easy to sort of sell that to people. And like you said, there's lots of great personalities and stories on the team, very marketable. So I won't say that Baker and Nick have an easy job, but it's a lot easier to sell people when they're very outwardly energetic and enthusiastic. And I'm not saying Nathan wasn't. I love talking to Nate. When the cameras are off, he's a different guy. But it's you're right. On camera, he was very straightforward. Yeah.
Well, would you rather sell Vernon or Lucky, or would you rather sell Trevor Harris here in Regina? I think like there's certain social media teams have. I think that is a tougher sell here with Trevor Harris coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. The Lions have no shortage of guys that they can sell, and I really fear for those guys trying to big up Trevor Harris.
Last thing for me, so, we did the uniforms, right? We're doing the bone and blackout or whatever and all of that. I told Matt Baker, I want to work the Markcast to get to the point where I get those jerseys sent to me like Don and Dolly did or whatever. I said, I wonder how do I get on that? I want to get on that level here. We've had the owner of the team on our show for about 35 minutes, but we'll get there. But then, the Argos do it now, and I think Montreal, they said they're doing a new uniform next year. Are we a fan of this? Are we just trying? Is this false sparking? Is this a false fire? What do you make of this?
Well, I would actually like to take personal credit for the Lions changing their uniforms this year. I'd been lobbying Amar since he came to bring back the gunmetal gray. Because those are dope. Those are my favorite Lions jerseys of all time. Even though you couldn't read the numbers or the letters on the back, I love the color scheme. And so I think he kind of took that under advisement, tapped myself on the back, and came out with these jerseys. I think the blackout one is nice. You can't go wrong with black and orange. It's pretty classy. The fog gray or the bone.
Oh, fog. Yeah, fog. Yeah. That's what it was.
It's pretty nice jersey. I will give him that. I think that you have to kind of change things up. If you're going to be, you want to sort of differentiate yourself and continue to evolve, because I don't think the CFL can afford to stay stagnant. You need to freshen it up. And so, I like the Toronto uniforms. Baby blue. I'm a UNC guy, so I love that color scheme. I'd love to see what they come out with. You said Montreal's coming out with the.
I think next year. I think they said.
Yeah, I'd love to see. I think it's great. I'd love to see Winnipeg do something different. I think they have the classiest color scheme, but they all look the same to me. They've changed it, but they all kind of look the same. So. I'd like to see something from out of Winnipeg. They're the franchise, right? The model franchise. Do something different. Do something, bold.
They just got the big ass W on there, right?
Well, come on, do something. So I don't know if you want to market the Bombers in this political kind of climate. I don't know if that's the best. It's kind of like the Washington Bullets. That wasn't the best name. They had to change that back in the day. So yeah.
Last thing for me, how do you feel just, CFL existing here going into this year, welfare check on the league and the health and everything else?
I think it's stronger than it was coming out of the pandemic. It's not hard. It's not hard. I think there's a crop of new owners. There's some new life in the league. They're really trying to push to do things differently than they did before. So I think they're really trying to evolve. It'll be interesting to see how they continue to coexist with XFL. As much as they never want to admit it, it's had a huge impact on the CFL on the player front. So if they can find a way to coexist and not compete, I think that would only help the league. But as an individual entity, I think it's I think it's the strongest place it's been in at least last decade. So I think they're doing the right things. Now let's see if they can attract some new blood in the league. Need to replace some of those fans who maybe aren't watching as much TV as they used to. Let's just say that. So yeah, no, I think it's in a good place.
I think it was a direct quote from John Hodge that said, CFL staff wants the XFL and USFL to die. I think that was basically a direct quote on the podcast about. So, but it's competition for players, and I think long term, if the XFL and or USFL survive, and it increases Canadian talent up in the CFL because they have to look inward. I think that's great. It helps everybody. Then everyone, it's more jobs and more roles for everybody. So, I think it should be good. JJ, anything else from you? I appreciate it here. Maybe we'll get you on here sometime during the season. Hopefully, I think they predicted 9 or 10 wins. They had the ratings come out this week. Some wager thing talked about all the team wins or how many wins people are going to get. The BC Lions were a 10-win team, I think.
Oh, I would have given them a little more than that. But hey, I'm not the guy setting all those money bets. So yeah, interesting. But anytime you want to talk BC Lions, happy to come on. Anytime, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Well, I appreciate it. We have, I guess, joining live correspondent here from Argos training camp. We have Mike Hogan here with the Argonauts. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great. Better now that I'm talking to you.
Well, I appreciate that. So now that, the Argos have won, like, do you get to go around, like, when you and Dave Campbell and all your other guys do your secret meetups, do you get to, like, flex a little bit harder with the Argonauts, the Grey Cup champions?
I love the fact that so far I have never, and this will continue right now because I didn't bring up Grey Cup champions. You did. So anytime I've been interviewed across the country, I have never brought that up. I've always let the other people do that, including in Hamilton, where I did 3 different shows last week, and I'm proud to say I didn't bring it up once.
But that's exciting, though. It's good. We were there, exciting, and obviously with the Chad Kellys of it all, and McLeod, and now he's in the USFL. It seems like the Argos are in the news a lot, which is exciting because obviously we've talked in the past and others about everything. It seems like kind of the arrow's pointing up a little bit. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, it is. Every little bit helps. We got quite a bit of a boost from the uniform release and the helmet release and the 150 news conference, where we had CTV, CBC, Global, TSN, and we had all the major dailies there, which is not a normal occurrence for an Argonaut news conference, sadly, in this market. So to see that kind of response, hopefully we're becoming the cool kids again. You'll see more people in the stands at BMO Field this year, which is great news. And this is our 150th anniversary season. So we've got a lot of bells and whistles planned, some of which we've revealed, some we have not.
Is that one of those things? It feels like planning, must start a little bit further out, right? And looking forward to the season. It's cool. And I know Mike Mitchell covers the Argos for CFL News Hub, and he's a lifelong Argos fan, but it does seem like it's a really cool milestone for the CFL, for the Argos, for everything, for the city and all the, the owners, everyone across the board, for 150 years now.
One of the things that we did, and we did mention this at the news conference, so we're not really speaking out of turn, and it's got a little bit of play so far on social media. A panel of 5 of us went through Argonaut history, 150 years, and came up with the 150 top moments in Argo history, which was not easy. Luckily, we had, I don't know if you know James Fraser or not. He runs the Twitter account, Bygone Boatman. Yeah. He's a history professor here at the University of Guelph whose passion is pre-CFL Toronto Argonaut football. This list would be different without him. The author Paul Woods, the longtime broadcaster and lifelong Argo fan Don Landry, and Danny Webb, the longest-serving Argo employee who started as the equipment manager in 1985. The 5 of us got together, and it was about a 3-month exercise, and I don't know how many hundreds of hours of manpower were spent on this, but we were actually very, very surprisingly happy with the list. I think we have every decade represented except the 1890s.
Oh, there you go. I like that. So a lot of pressure here coming into this season to perform. We've had the preseason game. I want to talk a little Brian Scott and everything else, but how did you feel like the Argos have looked so far headed into the season?
What's expected. I mean, the defense is ahead of the offense, and usually that's the case in training camp. And Chad Kelly has looked really good. I think everybody's a little relieved. I don't think it was a question at all, but there's always that thing in the back of your mind until you see it. But Chad looks fantastic, so we're not worried there. Somebody I assume is going to step up and take the reins in that number 2 battle. You mentioned Brian Scott. It's a 3-way race, and one day one guy will look great. Cameron Dukes will look great the next day, and Ben Holmes will look great the next day, and then it seems everybody will take a little bit of a regression, and somebody else will step up the next day. So that's one of the things I think in the final preseason game. That's going to be something that the offensive side of the ball is going to be looking at. But I think the defense looks fantastic. Not everybody's been healthy in camp. Somebody gets a little nicked. They really err on the side of caution, so one day doesn't become 1 week. Give them the day off, and ready to go. The entire coaching staff is back, which with a championship team especially is exceptionally rare. But we're lucky here in Toronto where everybody stayed put.
Well, that's the thing with the quarterbacks, and it's, obviously in all of these leagues and the CFL, and even this year with the roundtable, Trevor's moving and Cody's moving, and Vernon, like all that. To have Chad Kelly here, you have this monumental, McLeod, who's at least in the time that we've covered the CFL, one of the mainstays, at least with the Argos, and I know our time is very short in the Argos history, but he goes, and then it's like, oh my God, we have just this up and coming star here ready to go. I mean, how fortunate is that for the Argos, and what do you attribute that to be able to know that to be in such a good spot right now?
Yeah, it's great. He knows the offense. It's not like there was a learning curve for him. His learning curve was last year in terms of, assimilating a new game, the new rules, the size of the field, the size of the ball, all of that stuff. He's used to that now. He got number 2 snaps last year, got to play in a game at the end of the season, and we did a conversation, and you can read our conversation at argonauts.ca. He says that the game he got in at the end of the season probably meant more to his confidence than even the Grey Cup, because it had been so long since he had actually played a full game. He got in, played really well, and that kind of got his mojo back. And who knows what happens in the Grey Cup if he didn't get those reps in the final game, which meant nothing in the standings, but to the guys who got in, especially the first timers like Chad, it meant the world. So. He's in, he's got the keys to the car. He's cool with that. He's been a leader vocally and otherwise, and has looked really good in camp. So, if there are any worries that anybody may have had in the back of their minds, and I know he hasn't even played an exhibition game yet, just a scrimmage, but I don't think anybody here is worried about Chad at all.
Well, I hear a lot, and we've had Naylor on the show in the past and talking about this learning curve, quarterbacks coming up from America there. Here's Chad. It seems like, is it just his, what do you attribute that to, him being able, one exhibition game at the end of the season, is it make a great quarterback? So what do you attribute that to, him being able to step up so well?
Like all of the best quarterbacks, he's a film junkie. He wants to get better. His long-term goal, like most American players, is to get back to the NFL, and he's putting in the work. He was up here all off season. He was in with Dinwiddie a lot. He was working out with the receivers. He's not too far from home, being from Buffalo, but which an hour and a half, an hour depending on traffic, down to QEW. So it's within driving distance to go and see his family and friends. But he stayed up here and really threw himself at the offense, and even was looking back apparently at stuff that Dinwiddie had done in Calgary. Like, he just really wanted to know kind of the genesis of the offense. So he knows it inside and out, and that work ethic has shown. He talks about doing the right things this year, being in bed on time, putting the right things into his body in terms of nutrition, and he's put in the work. If you want to talk to him, if you're a member of media after practice, you're going to have to wait a while, because he's doing other stuff, whether it be, gassers across the sideline, or, taking snaps with Peter Nicastro, or throwing with the receiver. Like, he's always doing something. So nothing he does this year is going to be by accident. That's for sure.
In terms of the backup quarterback position, and not to be a biased journalist here on my end, but, Brian Scott has famously been on the show. Ben Holmes has famously no-showed our show. So if you want to know where my loyalties lie in terms of men getting this second, but I saw Ben Grant tweeting, writing a lot about Brian Scott. We were all communicating in our, we have like our XFL little media group. Did he, and I know that it was said that it was like the worst game that Ben's played, in his time. And also Brian looked really good, but where Ben was there last year, Brian's coming in. Has Brian impressed, or what did you make of his performance?
Yeah. And again, having that pro background is going to help. There are the nuances that he has to pick up. And I talked to him, and he said one of the things, I asked him about the 20-second clock, because I've talked to guys who have come up, even playing in the NFL, and the 20-second clock will beat them quicker than anything else, because they're used to coming in, getting the play in their helmet, kind of sauntering up to the line, looking over the line of scrimmage, calling the audible, checking down. And by the time that happens, play's done. But he said it really seems to help his rhythm. He really liked it, playing with it, not only in the scrimmage here, but in the preseason game in Hamilton. So he's really seeming to pick it up. Ben Holmes had a tough day. He's the first guy to mention. He threw 2 interceptions. It sounds like both were on him. I'm the last guy that's going to blame a quarterback or a receiver because I don't know the route. But just hearing kind of, anecdotally that it was on Ben. Ben took full responsibility for it. I asked him what he's looking to do on Thursday night, and he said, how about not throwing 2 interceptions? Because he knows he had a rough one. No question about that. And with Cameron Dukes, Cameron showed a lot too. Like he showed that little giddy up, an underhand toss coming out of his end zone, a nice scramble to set up a 2-point conversion. He showed the mobility that really helps in this league. And after watching Mac, God love him, he's got a lot of strong suits. Mobility ain't his long suit, although he could run when he needed to, and has shown that obviously in the USFL as well with some interesting highlight runs where he kind of got cartwheeled at the end of one of them. But that mobility with Chad and the guys behind him is just it's interesting because we've had guys like Ricky Ray up here, McLeod Bethel Thompson, who were more the traditional back, drop back guys. So to see the guys running around a little bit and extending plays, I think Argo fans are going to like that style, and hopefully everybody is able to fulfill what they want to do by buying that a little bit of extra time by scrambling out of the pocket.
Well, I think that's a good point, and you have Ben got cut kind of pre the USFL. He kind of got cut in their training camp, but having Brian Scott there and even Chad and his background, but getting these, I guess, fresh quality quarterbacks up there, I think is exciting. And we talk all the time, is the XFL, like, how are they all going to do all these quarterbacks and everything? But at least right now, it seems like the Argos are in a really good spot. Not to focus too much on that, but in terms of carrying over from last year to this year, just, championship team and everything, the rest of the roster, how do the Argos look here headed in? Because obviously, it wasn't the prettiest season and win, but they got it done. And it was, I heard, they just said, we're on the sidelines. We all got to get together here in Winnipeg and kind of everything else. But how have they done carrying over to this season?
It's been interesting because I have not seen any championship merchandise. I have not heard anybody talk about 2022 unless they were asked about it. Ryan Dinwiddie at the beginning of the camp said, hey, if you're looking in the rearview mirror, you're not looking ahead. And if you look too much in the rearview mirror, we're screwed essentially. So that's been the mantra: is 2022 is nice. Take from it what you needed in terms of your development. But CFL is going to be tough. The East is going to be tough again. Hamilton has improved. Ottawa has improved. Montreal might be the wild card in all of this. They might be better than people think, or they may be, they may be the weak sister this year. But you've got a few veterans on that team who want to win. And there is always that surprise team in the CFL, so you can't take anything for granted. This team knows it just can't, throw on the beautiful new uniforms, go out there and win the games. They've got to go and put in the work, and that's been evident this year. And all of the coaching staff has been very, very firm in terms of, okay, this is what we have to do to get better. And it's been always looking ahead. Dinwiddie's mantra is 2% better every day. And that's been the goal is to get better every day.
I was just got off with JJ Adams talking BC Lions preview, and I said the most intriguing storyline to me is Cody Fajardo in Montreal. I can't think of a more exciting. I mean, he's been on the show now in the off season. I'm a fan, and I think he's kind of going in full heart, full steam ahead. I don't think he knows any different, but I think the East, people, and you get all these poo-pooing and everything with the East. I think it's going to be exciting this year. I think there's a lot of mobility over there, and you get Mazzoli back and everything else to kind of see how that looks.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anybody in the East is taking anybody for granted. Things will obviously start to play itself out. But, you mentioned last year the kind of weird season it was. I don't know the last time a team, and maybe it happens more than you think, but it was really weird where we led the league in games missed due injury and still won the Grey Cup. People looked and said, Toronto. We never really had our starting lineup until toward the end of the season and looked, oddly enough, playing our best football toward the end of the season. So, that hoping obviously that replicates this year, but maybe a fewer number of games missed due to injury, because it was nuts last year. It really is a testament to the coaching staff and the guys who were in those, backup roles that were able to come in and sustain success until the guys got back. And a lot of them just did start rolling back just before the end of the season.
I got to talk with Coach Dinwiddie during the media day at the end of the season. I don't get a lot of, obviously, opportunities to kind of talk one-on-one with CFL head coaches like that, but, incredible guy, conversation. What is the growth that you've seen him have here as a leader, coming in, and obviously with kind of it was, messy kind of here. We're in the CFL, we're getting through everything and moving into this year more normalcy, but what do you attribute from him to just kind of the leadership on the team?
He's still a tough coach, and maybe this goes back to something that we touched on a little bit earlier today. His first year, he really wanted to work the guys and get as many plays in training camp so he could take a look at film and implement what he wanted to do. And this year, if a guy is a little bit nicked up, it'll be take the day off, where he's pushing them a little less. He knows the guys now, the veterans especially, so that's a big help. But I think he learned in the first year there was a play at the end of a scrimmage where he was thinking about, okay, maybe I should let the guys go. It's a hot day. Now let's play one more play. And in that play, Isaiah Cage was injured for the entire season. So that was a learning curve from Coach Dinwiddie, and he continues to get better. And every coach does, every player does with the more experience they have in a specific role. And he's continuing to learn as a head coach and has the respect of everybody in the organization. And, 2 years here, he was, he won the East in the regular season, came within 15 minutes of winning the Eastern Final, and then won the Grey Cup last year. So he's been very successful here, and I don't think anybody here expects the Argos to be anything but successful. Good enough to win the Grey Cup? We hope so, from sitting here in Guelph, but there are a lot of good teams in this league.
Last thing for me today, obviously you get to know a lot of these players and the stories and stuff. Who are you looking to see kind of standout performances this year on the field?
Yeah, I'm interested to see guys who performed well in other uniforms and how they play here. Flo Arimolade is a guy who really flashed last year. If you look at his stats, you go, huh? But if you're to kind of scratch under the surface and just look at quarterback pressures, which isn't a widely, circulated stat, sadly, in the CFL, you'd see what kind of pressure he would put on. Darius Pickett coming over. To play the Sam linebacker spot after being Montreal's most outstanding defensive player a year ago. Jordan Williams, who astonishingly, we were able to acquire in a trade, had nothing to do with BC or being unhappy in BC. His day job is as a day trader, and he was tired of getting up at 3:00 in the morning to get work done in BC because of the time change. Wanted to come east, and the Argos traded the 9th overall pick in the CFL draft to get him. And if this guy in his third season, going into his third year, let's just say he wouldn't have lasted until the 9th spot in the draft. So it was a good trade for the Argos, and that gives a little flexibility there because he can play the Mike, he can play the Will. So I think those are the kind of guys, and I'm curious to see how Robertson Daniel comes back after a couple of years of being injured. He's looked really good at the field halfback spot. So I'm sorry, the boundary halfback spot. So I'm really curious to see how he does under a full season. But they've got some guys. There's some good guys in this camp.
Well, Mike, I appreciate it. I'm excited. I'm really excited for the season now because we've got through the XFL here and we've been doing that and we're getting USFL rolling through. It feels like putting on old shoes now. We're going our third season in the CFL coverage. I appreciate it. We have our flights booked to Hamilton, so I hope I see the Argonauts there, hopefully against America's CFL team, the BC Lions. But I hope to see you guys there, and I really appreciate your time. Hopefully we get you on here once we get some games rolling and talk some more Argonauts.
Anytime you need me on, just ask. And thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, I just purchased my ticket here. I couldn't fly into Hamilton. I was trying to, but I'm coming back to Toronto here for Grey Cup in November. So hopefully I'll be seeing this gentleman, Steve Milton. How are you doing, sir?
You definitely will. I think every night in the writer's suite, won't you? Remember, we have a suite there for all football writers of Canada, and you're one of them.
Well, that's good. We're all in. I'm all in. I've got everything. We have Steve here. We've done BC Lions preview on this show. We've done the Argonauts, and now we're doing the TiCats here. Steve, finishing training camp here. How is everything going in Hamilton with the TiCats?
Well, it was going, I would think, fairly well, Reed, until yesterday. There was some kind of accident on campus, and it wasn't on the field with a player. They had, you know how you're always looking for those little gems? This is a team that brought in a lot of high-priced help, proven help, but they needed to because of the salary cap, have a couple of surprises at a couple of spots, and they found one in a guy named Justin McGriff that comes out of Utah State. You don't see this in this league. He's 6'6" and fast and makes really good moves. He's been terrific in training camp. In the exhibition game last week, he dropped the first pass after running a brilliant route and outdistancing the guy by 10 yards on the straight fly, dropped it, and then caught 4 passes in very, very heavy traffic, like right over the middle, to prove that, so he had made the team and had made the team as a starter. And yesterday there was some accident. I don't know what it was, but it was off the field, and it was somewhere on campus, and I don't know what it was. I don't know if he tripped and fell, and there's a lot of construction around here or whatever it was. I'm still investigating that. He's done for the season, right? So he never even got to play. He was the kind of guy that exactly what they were looking for. He was the tallest receiver by 3 inches. The quarterback they're using, Bo, isn't the tallest guy in the world, so it always helps to have a guy that you can see by looking over the top instead of having to look underneath. So that was a bit of a setback, but they were very, very, very deep at receiver, both Canadian and American receivers. So, and Anthony Johnson, who was briefly with the Buffalo Bills, was a guy they were looking at as a possession receiver. He played last year. He's out, but only for a couple of games. So, other than that, they've been okay. They got a lot of. They have some injuries on the defensive front, but they had too many players, proven CFL players, on the defensive front anyway. Somebody was going to have to go on some kind of list or get cut. So now they're hurt, but they're a veteran team. So I think that injuries could play a factor, but they've built that into the way they've built their roster.
Feels like there's obviously with Bo and everything else, a really high level of expectations this year going. I mean, is it one of the higher team profiles in terms of like, we kind of got to deliver this year? Yeah,
it probably similar to Zach the year he was coming off the great year and had come back after injury. This in recent years, Reed, this is the closest I've seen to a this year or nothing type of thing. I mean, they've got some futures tied into this too, but this is made for a hometown Grey Cup. They almost won the last time they had a hometown Grey Cup. They had a team that was built for that, but this is built even more for that. They went and got only players that had some success, either in the league finals or the conference finals. So, and guys they upgraded a lot of positions. They're up against or over the salary cap. So, and that's, they'll have injuries to accommodate that. This is I think it's not Grey Cup or bust, but it's pretty well nothing but at least an appearance in the Grey Cup will do. I mean, anything else will be a failure. Then anything short of appearing in the Grey Cup is a failure.
It's just weird, because obviously we were there back Hamilton, coming up short and so close here. And it just felt like they completely collapsed last year, the TiCats. And I know that Dane had some injuries and everything, and obviously he got shipped over here to BC. But what did you attribute to such the kind of collapse last year?
It was just there was a lack of sustained mental toughness, I think, and emotional toughness. Now, that began at quarterback, for sure, and Dane would be the first one. I felt he took almost too much blame there, but there was a lot to blame. There was a lot to blame there, especially early. They fell behind, and every game looked the same, Reed, even the games that they won where they do well in the first half. I thought there was a coaching issue last year in terms of adjustments at the half. They'd look really, really good. The defense was good most of the year, except on always a key drive in the fourth quarter. They'd get a bad punt in there. Like, they all looked the same, even the games that they won. They lost the first 4, and the 5th they won, the other team was coming back and kind of ran out of real estate, and it was Ottawa. Or they would have been 0-5 with every game looking the same. The Grey Cup looked the same. The playoff loss to Montreal looked the same. I'm wondering if there wasn't an imprint. They poo-poo maybe on this one. But I wondered if it wasn't a bit of a psychological imprint of losing 2 Grey Cups in a row, particularly the way they lost the second one at home when it was theirs, right? It was theirs. It took until the fourth quarter until Zach found what everybody knew was going to be a penetrable weakness, because they were missing a couple of players in the defensive backfield. But it took until the fourth quarter to find it. And even then, they had a chance at one of the greatest comebacks in history there. And it was I would say a dropped pass in the end zone. That pass was there. Great defensive play, but you got to make that play, and they win. And then they lose it in overtime. And even in overtime, there was an interception in which the offensive receiver should have broken it up as a defensive player, so they'd have one more play. So there's that. And I'm not sure that when they started having some turnovers and fumbles from key positions in the first couple of games last year and got off to they usually get off to an 0-2 start or a 1-3 start. And except that one year they went 15-3. They usually do that, and they're fighting. Well, they were really fighting from a hole last year, and that just problems multiplied. They didn't have good kicking, didn't have good placement kicking till maybe 8 games into the season last year. And when that came and they solidified the offensive line, the quarterback started playing better. Like Dane had a pretty good last third of the season.
Were you surprised to see him basically traded for, it kind of shipped off to BC for kind of a bag of chips here, it feels like?
I think they were, in a way, trying to help him out, but they didn't really help him out that much. They couldn't have brought him back after. It was just one of those things where they felt they got a sense that Bo was available. They got a sense when they saw him in the West semifinal that his arm was okay. And when he came off the bench in the fourth quarter, and that kind of solidified things. I think the fact that Dane was so obviously and self-admittedly and publicly, and I commend him as a human being for that, for basically talking about the stresses that he was under and the pressures that he was under, and admitting a lot of things. But that isn't always the right way to do it if you happen to be the quarterback of a football team, right? So I think that's what they felt. As a reporter, I felt differently. Watching him as a human being conduct himself and be honest about it, I really like that. But they know that he's a pretty good player, but they think that Bo has the championship pedigree, and they like Schultz enough to keep him around as a backup. So they're pretty good 1-2 at quarterback there. So assuming that Bo comes in, takes command. He really runs things, and he has a presence with the defense too. They really, and he brought players. Players came here because of that. They signed some big names, and that wasn't going to be the number one reason those players came, but it was a factor.
Do you, and obviously his pedigree and mental, all of that stuff, but physically is Bo, from what you've seen in training camps and stuff, right? Did he play a little bit yet, or they weren't sure if he was going to go in? He
won't play Friday night. He played only 2 series. And really, they were short series. He was out by the end of the first quarter. They liked what he saw. He threw. He was 3 for 6, but 2 of the 6 were drops, including the one I mentioned at the top of the show to Justin McGriff, who ran this incredible pattern. Bo hit him in full stride, right in the midst, and he dropped it. And about a 50-yard pass. And so, he's looked pretty good. He's looked pretty accurate. I'm sure he doesn't have the same. He's not the same guy that he was 10 years ago, but he's smart. He won't elude people with his speed the way, some other quarterbacks do, or the way that Bo did at one point. But he does elude. He just can make that one, like Ricky Ray was later in his career, just make that one little shift with his shoulders, and all of a sudden the guy goes rushing by him. So you don't have to run out into the open to do it. So, and he can get out enough, and they've really, really made sure the offensive line is ready. They'll go with 3 Canadians, not 4. Chris Van Zyl is there as an option, but he's hurt, likely out the first 6 games, and didn't play much last year. So, they've really taken care to, they're spending money on American tackles at left tackle, bringing back Joel Figueroa, who started here back in 2013. And, he may be a little long in the tooth, but he's got a lot of experience, and Bo likes him because he's big. And James Butler is a tremendous running back. So they have they had a pretty good running back who ran downhill hard last year, but this guy has more has more ability and a quicker first few steps. So he's got breakaway speed once he gets to the second level.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question, was about Butler, and obviously we were talking with JJ over for the BC Lions, and kind of, that to me that was a big loss when they didn't pick up his contract or whatever, and he decided to go. How has he made a difference so far? Do you think he's going to be a big difference maker?
Yeah, they're going to use him they're using him in a variety of ways. I mean, he's pretty good out of the backfield catching the ball. So I think what they're going to try and do is isolate him in a couple of ways. They may swing him into a short side wide receiver at times, like either on a swing pass, but I think the bubble screen is what they're really looking at there, where at the worst he's going to be one-on-one with somebody if the other guys even come close to making the other two guys even come close to making their blocks. And I don't know that, like with his speed and his size, he can go over or around people. That's the feeling, and assuming he stays healthy. And they're looking for a similar type backup. So there's a bit of a runoff between two guys for his backup, but it'll be clearly as a backup in practice or type things. He was a big get for him, just as their middle. They wanted to get tougher at middle linebacker. Their middle linebacker made the All-Star team, the Eastern All-Star team last year, led the team in tackles, fifth most tackles in TiCat history. But I think Thamir German is a much more physical type of player, very much a physical guy. And they're looking for that. They thought they needed to get more physical. And when I talked at the top about, I thought they lacked a little bit of emotional toughness at key moments last year. I think they felt that at times that was related to physical toughness too. They lost a lot of fourth quarters last year, a lot. I mean, at one point in the season, particularly the first 12 games, the margin by which they'd been outscored in the fourth quarter was spectacular. Like, it was ridiculous. It was like the game was played in two parts.
In terms of coaching staff for this year, right? Reinbold's back. We've had them sweep up. What do you make of the staff that they have going in this year?
Well, they did one thing that happened. I don't know if you're aware of. There was a cap on coaching staffs financially and on numerically, and also on football operations numerically, cash wise. So what they did was roll that all into one. So instead of being capped at 11 coaches plus a salary cap for both, for football ops and for football coaching, the whole thing now is capped. There's an overall salary cap for all of football operations. So that includes staff, that doesn't include trainers and doctors and those kind of people, but it does include scouts and GMs and all of those things, even the portion of probably Orlando, because he's president of football ops. And you could have 25 jobs in those positions. And so the TiCats chose to go to 13 coaches that way. So they have now an extra coach on special teams, and they brought in the former Argo head coach Scott Milanovich in a similar role to when they brought in Kahari Jones last year. But they're doing it from the start of the year. Last year was in result, I think, was a reaction to offensive woes. That team could put up yards last year, but could not score touchdowns. Now, that's another reason they went and got Bo. Like, Bo is touchdown first, like always. Like, Bo considers turning it over to the field goal kicker a defeat. So that mentality is something that they wanted there. But also the offense wasn't scoring a lot of touchdowns in general last year for a lot of reasons. So I wondered if Scott Milanovich was there to kind of help with a little bit. Tommy Condell, who is the offensive coordinator, is also the quarterback's coach and is good with quarterbacks. He's developed a lot of them over the years. So it's just an extra set of eyes, that kind of thing. Scott Milanovich, of course, Orlando worked with him at the 2012 Grey Cup team when they were both with the Argos. And Milanovich, of course, is a very proven football man. He doesn't want to be a head coach right now, but I think he's going to commute a little bit from his Florida home, but I think eventually he wouldn't mind getting back in. This is a pretty good way for him to do it.
In terms here, just looking forward, I'm looking here before we get you out of here. Obviously, big game next week. Winnipeg at right. Winnipeg going to be a big. What are you looking to see in that? I mean, I know we have the preseason games and stuff this weekend, but when it comes to the real deal, what are you looking for against Winnipeg that first week?
Hold on to the ball. I think that's the big thing. we don't know if Seth Small will be back. That's the kicker, and he's been away. His wife had a baby, and so he's on the suspended list because he wanted to take longer than you normally would. He's a family guy. I don't know what else is going on there, but so hang on to the ball. That was the big problem much of last year, particularly early. In fact, many of the part of the last decade, except for a year or two, hanging on to the ball early in the season and beating yourselves has been a big thing. I think they're looking for fewer penalties than they got against Toronto, a little more discipline that way. And now you've got two big receivers out of the 5 you were going to use not playing, and Anthony Johnson, who will be back, and Justin McGriff, who will not. So both pretty good at spreading the ball around, and the manner in which they use Butler on offense. On defense, I'm also looking for Lawrence Woods to maybe take one back. He's playing defense, but he's a hell of a punt returner and a kick returner too. So they'll use him a bit back there, probably just on kickoff returns. So I'm looking for special teams there with Reinbold's influence because he's a heck of a special teams coach. On defense, the linebacking core is fairly new. The front four has 4 starters, but they've also got 4 starters hurt. They had 8 starters, to fill basically 6 positions. So the rotation is 6 or 7, right? And see how that will affect them against Winnipeg, who has a pretty good running game and has the biggest line in the league still. I think that line's not as good as it once was, but it's still among the premier lines in the league. Those are the 3 things. How do they do how do they do the trenches, and how does Bo find enough guys, and is Butler the key to the offense? Is it spin off Butler and Tim White? Is that the way it's going to be? And is there at one point I wondered if there was enough football to go around, Reed. They just had so many people who could play, but Bo's used to that. He played on some pretty powerful Calgary teams. They didn't always get to the Grey Cup or win it, but they were always very powerful, very deep.
Well, I'm excited. I think this season is going to be good. I'm sure a lot of eyeballs here with Hamilton, with Bo and hosting and all that stuff. So hopefully we'll get you back on here once we get some games. But Steve Milton over here with the Hamilton Spectator, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Reed.
A huge special thanks to all of our guests today for coming on. Like I said, really appreciate the Professor Andrew Murray making time. I said, Andy, I texted him the other day, the layoffs. I said, we need the professor this week. Andy coming on whenever he is called, doing due diligence. And then obviously Evan Willsmore taking time, busy, getting into the summer and his busy work schedule. Certainly appreciate Evan's time. Thanks again to Furby, everyone over at RunTheSims, everyone there doing the work for the USFL and the XFL. All of that fantasy stuff that's kind of way above my head, but certainly appreciate their insights. And then the 3 CFL writers we had on today, JJ Adams and Mike Hogan. Mike's not the writer, Mike's an announcer, but you get what I'm saying. The 3 CFL talent, JJ, Mike, and then certainly appreciate Steve Milton as well. Looking forward to catching up, probably having a beer with at least Steve here coming up in Hamilton for November. We have our ticket spot for the Grey Cup. That'll do it for me today. Like I said, keep track on Twitter and the YouTube channel, but Pat and I will be here Monday for our USFL recap, CFL live pregame show on Thursday, and then a special live episode with Andy Murray next Friday. Busy times, rookie draft episode coming as well, June 16th. Thanks as always. Like and subscribe. See you next time.